A very warm welcome to all of you on behalf of Room to Read and USAID. Most of us have not met either face to face or some of us may not know each other. So we were requested a round of introduction. I'll begin with myself. Sorry. Oh, yeah. Okay, I'll begin with myself. I'm Purnima, and I'm honored to serve Room to Read India as the country director, and you will have an enriching experience today with all the dialogues with all the practitioners and implementers and subject matter experts today. So looking forward to interacting with each one of you. Thank you.
I'm Dheev Jingran from the Language and Learning Foundation.
I am Bhagyalakshmi from Room to Read.
I am Shubhra from Vikramshila.
I'm Karsten van Riesen from SAL International.
I'm Chandni from Simple Education Foundation.
I'm Draupadi from Pratham Education Foundation.
Hello, I'm Samyukta. I'm from the early years team at Pratham Education Foundation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Shrutika from Simple Education Foundation.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Sukhna from Rocket Learning.
Hi, everyone. I am Gayatri Vaidya from Educational Initiatives.
Hi, everyone. I'm Viji from the British Council.
I am Jayashree Oza, the advisor at Central Square Foundation.
Hi, I'm Anustu. I'm from Central Square Foundation.
Hi everyone, I'm Simi from Room to Read.
Hi, I'm Shakti from Room to Read.
I'm Shailaja from Tata Trust, and I noticed that Shakti's kept 2 mics near him. Beware.
That's often what good performers do.
All right, I think without a further ado, let's start and dwell deep into the topic of the science of reading, the challenges and opportunities. And, science, as we all know, is a structured study of experiments, observation and analysis. It uncovers the facts with evidence, with rigorous methods. And essentially, science, to me, is a pursuit of knowledge to understand the world in its natural and physical form. Implementation science, on the other hand, it accelerates the integration and the adoption of evidence-based practices flowing into literacy and reading program. We are all practitioners, implementers here, and we have used evidence-based literacy program researchers into our programs at different point of time. Implementation science also helps us bridge the gap between the research and the practice. It sometimes also helps us take care of the program effectively at different scales. Sometimes I would say some of the best practices or the strategies can be adopted which would have probably worked in past in similar context. And that brings me to the point of importance of reading proficiency. Reading proficiency is essentially about development of cognitive, socio-emotional, socio-economic, as well as creating lifelong learners. And science of reading just not focuses on the fluency, but also the comprehension, which essentially gives a structured education environment to the student in the classroom to understand the text, to understand the meaning of the learning material that's been given. Either it's given in a digital form or in a print format, or for that matter, let's consider for the moment sounds as well, because most of us are also working in a ECC space. So, I think, just to give you a brief context of this consultation, We started this consultation in collaboration with Stanford University, and our first inaugural roundtable conference was conducted early this year at Stanford, wherein we dwelled into the intricacies of bridging the gap between scientific research and educational practices in India. There were delegates from global academic forums, also the policy influencers, and there were very interesting conversations. The conversations wherein we talked about the importance of the holistic approach to bring in an educational reform. And we all know why it is so important. We also kind of talked about that why it is imperative in our different context, in our diverse context of India, to place the student in the center of this discourse. It was extremely important to keep that in mind. Now, while we all know the West is so interested in learning from India, that's also primarily because the evidence that we will create or we are creating can be best suited in any context, especially when it comes to large-scale program implementation. And continuing these 4 thoughts from the earlier consultation, it's important that we talk to all of you today, the practitioners, the implementers, to really share your experiences. And it's important to hear every voice, so as we are driving the key themes of comprehensive literacy approach, sustainable impact, and inclusive strategies. While policies like NEPs do signal a lot of progress, but there are challenges, the governance challenges of teacher absenteeism. There are challenges around weak recruitment policies that impedes effective implementation. And we all would have experienced it at different point in time. So I think, there has been a growing need to empower the teacher and to decentralize the education model, and to also align the learning outcomes as per the societal need. For over 2 decades, Room to Read has been working to contextualize its program based on the local needs, keeping its, of course, core principles intact, and really balancing the flexibility with fidelity. We've been tailoring trainings, materials, also our own strategies to fit the local context. I must say, it's just not Room to Read, it's a shared space. All of you present here would have used evidence-based practices, and we've been trying to implement effective literacy and numeracy programs through digital medium, through the in-person intervention. But we have done that in past, and we've been grounded with evidence-based practices, thorough monitoring, evaluation, and really tracking the progress through that and making adjustments, and informed adjustments, mind it, because the evidence that has been created help us take decisions. So these informed decisions have really helped us. And given it's a very common space, it makes sense for us to really hear all these voices and really come up together as a consortium to take it forward. Now, there has been a lot of efforts, if we talk about in terms of strengthening the capacities, promoting collaborative working models, and just to make sure that the communities are empowered and there is a sustainable change. Now, I'll take an example of one of our programs, which is called the Scaling Up Early Reading Intervention, which is supported by our long-standing partners, USAID. This program actually, started in 2015 in Uttarakhand, just in 50 schools. And it expanded to about 2,000 schools. Now, these collaborations exemplify our commitment to evidence-based literacy interventions and effectively how we can improve from our own experiences. Why I'm talking about 2015 in 2024? Because I think it's a journey that we have walked through this. And in 15, what we did, how we improved over a period of time, it's very important to understand. And when I say improved, it was always learning from your live experiences in the classroom, in the field, in the communities. Now, if I go back and look at the intervention results, the SERI schools, of course, the children studying in the primary grade in SERI schools outperformed the non-SERI schools probably about 1.5 to 2 times, having better reading skills. And of course, there is a way of looking at structured inputs, but at the same point in time, how do you continuously improve your own program, beat your own benchmark, to make sure that you are having better outcomes in the classroom with the student? Another example that I could give is Mission Ankur. Mission Ankur in Madhya Pradesh, we actually, as an organization, we implemented the learning from our SERI project, and we partnered with Central Square Foundation to start this program as technical partners in 2021. And again, the program was on the foundational learning and really specifically working with grade 1 and grade 2 children. And some of the offerings that were given in the program, which were really based on our experiences, our continuous process improvement, evidence-based research, were around trainings, capacity buildings, how you make sure that the system is strengthened. So these are all important learnings that we continue to work upon, we continue to celebrate, I would say. And, largely, I think what we would like to do today, and just to set the context of today's discussion, I think we need to cover the key themes to really talk about science of reading, including insights on our achievements, expert perspectives, strategies for advancing literacy across languages and age group. Reading in multilingual context. We have been talking about multilingual issues for a long time, but what is the context setting for it? How do we move forward with it? We understand the problem, but where is the solution? And to really even talk about balancing evaluation methods, because are we doing way too much assessment with our children? Is it really affecting them? So I think we even need to talk about those things. And then, consider the effects of different languages and scripts. We'll also try and tackle the biases. And I think it's important to notify that we must tackle the biases and practices in reading programs to improve outcome. And I deeply appreciate all of you agreeing to come here and really talking here. We want to assure you that this is a safe space. It's a very closed group discussion that we tried organizing to make sure that anything that we move ahead and do together is really something, if we are coming together as a group, of course, we can make a bigger dent. So that's what we are trying to achieve today. I would like to hand it over to my colleague, Ms. Stuti Jain, who works with us as National Program Coordinator. She'll take us through our journey of about a decade working on structured pedagogy, and also take us through some of the dilemmas that as an organization we got into and how these solutions came up. I'm very sure when she when she takes us through this journey, some of you would be able to correlate to it, will be able to draw up inferences, because the journey is very similar. The space is still new. There is a lot more to explore. So thank you so much for coming here, and we look forward to hearing more from all of you. Thank you so much.
So Purnima, thank you for bringing in some very, very important pointers in your talk. That West certainly is looking at India, the need of scalability, a scalable program in literacy which can help children read with understanding is the need of an hour. She also mentioned that in last 2 decades, the journey of Room to Read has been exceptional. From working in few libraries to few schools to today we are working with states and lakhs of children and lakhs of schools. The journey has been amazing. I've been a part of this journey since last couple of years, but I'm sure we have a lot of people sitting here in this room who have witnessed that journey even before me. So I will be picking up stories from the past, from the big pitara of the stories that Shakti has in his bag, and he keeps on sharing that with us, to connect the dots for all of you to be with me on this journey of last 10 years or 9 years of Room to Read India. So yes, let's get started with Room to Read India's A Gaze at the Science of Reading from year 2015 to 2024. As Purnima mentioned about scalability, India needs solutions at scale and in depth all across. We are the system with one of the largest education systems in the world, and we do not need solution which maybe solve a smaller problem for few schools, but which can solve the problem at a state or a national level. But let's see the journey of Room to Read, how during these 9 years the knowledge was constructed, the knowledge was created, and the knowledge was expanded. Let's move on to the year 2015 and 2016. Almost a decade back. It was the first time that Room to Read India actually did a first concerted effort to create an instructional package for children at foundational grades. Before that, we were working largely with libraries, and we also learned that by just giving authentic children literature to children in the classroom does not guarantee that children will know how to read. That has to be supplemented by an instruction program that will help children to understand how to read and then build the habit of reading through the authentic children literature that is provided. It was during this year actually when the science of reading was also appearing as a main perspective in the global module. I'm sure most of us has gone through the National Panel Reading Report of 2000, which was actually a very important document which influenced the curriculum contours of Room to Read India at that time. With the global module in place, Room to Read India took the initiative to actually contextualize for India. Because as we all know, India is a land of diversity. What works in Uttarakhand may not work in MP, and what works in MP may not work in Rajasthan. So the need of contextualization, the need of localization, and the presence of diversity helped us contextualize the module at that time, keeping the constituents of the module intact. If you see the picture 1, there are I guess 4 or 5 people sitting under a tree on a bench, looking there in a very, very deep thought. It's actually the instruction team of Room to Read India at that time. And they were the ones who actually started the whole process with Shakti here. So what I hear is actually there used to be great debates. The great debates about how do we learn from the researches that are happening at global level, and how do we actually connect to the classroom, to the need of the schools, to the need of the communities. How do we take the learnings from the global and make it Indian in practice? So that's the deep thought that's going on in 2015 and 2016. And then these debates actually went on for the turbulent brainstorming. Why I'm saying turbulent brainstorming? Because through this process, we were questioning each other, we were questioning the world outside, that is it only through the scientific lens to reading that a scalable solution in a country like India can be created? Or is it something else that is required? Is the Indian school system of that time is open enough to adapt a science-based curriculum? And how do we include reading for pleasure amidst all these scientific recommendations, which strongly believe that children should know how to read along with a structured pedagogy? So where does the reading for pleasure and reading for habit building comes along? Nonetheless, we went ahead. We started embracing the rigor that came along with this whole process. And here I would like to highlight three very, very important, I would say, pillars at Room to Read that we believe in. First is getting into the review of literature from the realm of science and beyond that. And trust me, we read a lot, and we are made to read a lot in Room to Read. Reading is our bread and butter, and half of the time we are really getting into what researchers are saying, what researchers are saying. The second is actually connecting with the field, always getting the feedback from the teachers, from the government officers, from the children that we are working with. We are always there in the classroom and connecting the dots with the research, with the design, with the program, to what the children are learning and how are they responding to the curriculum. And third, very, very important, scalability. What we are doing, can we scale that? Is our product or is our design scalable enough to a state, to a district, to a nation? So with these guiding principles, oh yes, how can I talk about reading and not present this literature review? It's just a snapshot of literature review of that time that were considered when we were actually creating this instruction design. And yes, here is the glimpse of our scope and sequence of year 2015 and 2016 that was created for Uttarakhand. As you can see here, so I'll just a little talk about what is scope and sequence. Scope and sequence is largely a framework which help us to understand that what are the key skills that we are going to be adding in our instruction design for literacy at foundational level. And sequence is actually a sequence which help us understand that at what sequence the aksharas are going to get introduced in the classroom. So for example, are we introducing aksharas in a traditional sequence of ka, kha, ga, gha, or are we introducing aksharas in a different sequence that could be ra, ka, ha, na, or say ka, la, mo, ka, right? So this is the scope and sequence that was created at that time with the Lord of Scientific Studies and working with children and understanding the language pattern of that area. So in year 2015 and 2016, while we were working with Uttarakhand, schools of Uttarakhand along with the science of reading, these are the first glimpse at the science of reading recommendation that Room to Read produced. First, as all of us are aware, reading is not a natural process as speaking is. Reading has to be taught explicitly and has to be learned through a continuous practice in the classroom. So children, when introduced a language, needs an explicit instruction design at foundational grades. Drill with aksharas are extremely essential for reading. So every day, children should get the opportunities to practice aksharas in the classroom. A scope and sequence of CV combinations are essential for blending and segmenting. What we were also observing at that time that by towards the end of grade 1, because the aksharas were introduced in a certain sequence, the children had started to blend, children had started to segment, Children also had started to read small sentences. Actually, most of them graduated to reading small decodable text. So by the end of year 1, children were actually reading. But there were unanswered questions too, because it's not easy when you scale and when you work with children. What is the science lens take on stories and library as a part of literacy? In all the schools that we were working at that time, library existed as a place with enormous number of books, a great children literature, but then how that library or literature gets connected with literacy in the classroom? What about intrinsic motivation for reading? When you work with children, you know they come from diverse background, how their morning was, and when they are in the classroom, you don't know what is the impact of intrinsic motivation for children is, and how do we work on it. We appreciated that phonics are required, the depth of it, but the reading is much more. Reading is actually understanding the layers of comprehension that the text harbors. Reading is just not decoding. It's about getting deep into it. The taste of scale. From few hundred schools, we reached to more than 1,000 schools in Uttarakhand. And we all know that when we start working with government, the negotiations start. And I can see some smiling faces here. I'm sure you are living it day in and day out. So yes, the negotiation with the academic body started on the science of reading-based curriculum. There was a lot of skepticism also that how can a changed scope and sequence, which is not the traditional sequence anymore, can fit in for the whole state? What level of localization is required and up to what extent? And I think the question that we all keep on hearing till date, does a scripted lesson kill teachers' autonomy? Is the narrative of literacy is just mere drilling or a mechanical teaching of skills? With these unanswered questions and some question that we had answered for, we move forward. Here I will show a small snippet from the teacher training that was done in year 2015-2016 with the teachers of Uttarakhand.
Government school teachers play a pivotal role in the SERI project. To apprise teachers of the new teaching design, a pool of master trainers were given intensive training by Room to Read. Teachers of the new teaching design, a pool of master trainers were given intensive training by Room to Read.
And after all that discussion, negotiation and training, there were some alignments that happened between Room to Read and government. The first, the rigor behind determining the frequency of letter and sounds were appreciated because they were seeing children starting to read in grade 1. This was appreciated. The scope and sequence gave opportunity to children to move forward from word to sentences. Agreement to scale up. All of us want children to read. And third is the usage of books in the classroom. Effective continuous teacher training, and very, very important when we scale, you have to continuously think about sustainability as well. So the joint visit with government officials with the focus on academics here is very important. I have a very interesting anecdote here to share. I'm not sure if the time permits. Okay, so maybe we'll catch up during the tea time for the story. All right.
It was a very short story.
Yes, from his Pitara.
Yeah, so in Uttarakhand, the team goes to buy grocery. And the man selling the grocery says, you guys have started with a different scope and sequence. Tell me why, otherwise we won't get you chawal or dal or anything. And that man has to sit, explain it to the grocery store owner. And it was interesting to see that how news had traveled from schools to the community, and people were concerned, people were worried, and they were asking questions. If you don't give us questions, okay, don't take away things.
And that shows how actually the theory becomes practice. Okay, moving ahead quickly, argumentative Indians at work again in 2015 and 2016. So while we were in the schools, while we were observing children reading, there were a lot of questions in our head. There were a lot of brainstorming on scalability and structured classroom processes. Day in and day out, our teams were in the classroom to understand the patterns of learning and patterns of children's feedback emerging from the classroom. This was also the time when actually a non-negotiables at RTR was getting decided. What do we hold on to when we scale? What are RTR's non-negotiable wherever in India that you work with? And a very interesting fluency deconstruction seminar, I'm sure Shakti would also talk about it once he started the roundtable, happened during this year. Year 2016 and 27 was the year where the multilingualism in India, the next set of challenges, was presented in front of us, because India is not only, you can just say literacy, but India is a multilingual nation with, I'm sure all of us sitting here knows at least 2 or 3 languages, but what about children who are bringing languages to the classroom? That was the time when Sirohi and Barwani project started, and we were fortunate enough that Dr. Minati Panda actually helped us to do the socio-linguistic mapping in the area, which gave us deep insights on the multilingualism and the languages that children bring to the classroom. Thus the beginning of literacy in multilingual India started. Let's hear from her.
Prior to developing the instruction curriculum, Dr. Minati Panda from Jawaharlal Nehru University did a socio-linguistic survey of Sirohi district.
The Sirohi study clearly showed the linguistic fluidity and the multilingual communicative practices of this country. This was obviously not an exception but a rule, and therefore what we need in education system is a framework founded on this multilinguality than on assumed mono or bilinguality. Whereas in phoneme system, there are few variations, like cha is called sa. So when a Hindi child or Marwari child says chamach, Adivasi Garasiya child says samas. And similarly, sa is replaced by ha. So when everybody, other speakers say Sirohi, Adivasi Garasiya invariably say Hirohi.
And this journey continued even forward, where we actually was fortunate enough to have Dr. Shalani Lag. She gave few guest lectures to Room to Read, and then our understanding of multilingualism in India took a step ahead. This was also a year where there were a lot of debates were happening around fluency benchmark. So in these various consultations that were pouring in and out Room to Read, we were very, very focused and always taking a step back that how the reading brain looks like, how children learn to read. We were absorbing, but we were always keeping children and the classroom at the center of it. But quickly,
the more children read, the better they become as readers. The more variety of what they read is what would make them a better reader. So the variety of texts is one thing I would encourage Room to Read to sort of promote. So not reading just the same thing over and over again, which is I think inbuilt in your program, the fact that you offer variety.
And this is a snapshot. You can see in the first picture the Literacy Renew, the program that was created where the child is actually practicing some blending activity. Second is a multilingual learning material that was actually designed while we were working in Sirohi and Barwani. And third, very, very important, that library got integrated as a part of literacy and as a part of must have in the process of learning. Year 2017 is a year of practitioner's dilemma and further search. This was the year when you could see a structured curriculum shaped up and was actually getting implemented in the school, but there was a need to extend it to make it more comprehensive. There were a lot of debates that were happening internally on orality. Orality was inbuilt, but it was inbuilt implicitly. And what we were observing that saying out in a teacher training or just implicitly building it was kind of not helping, and it required an explicit instruction. And we were also observing that children in the schools were not getting enough opportunities to talk. So this was the time when there was a debate on how do we integrate orality in our structured pedagogy, where and how of it. This was also the time when actually the literacy and the language strands were coming together through various books and materials. And at the background, the reference of science is not lost. It's always expanding, always growing in the other part of the world. I'll quickly move, but this is a very interesting photograph where children are actually talking on the posters that has been given to them. Again, a snapshot of the literature review that we went through while working on classroom practices in low and middle income countries to the multilinguality in India. Year 1819 was the year where some major thought milestone actually happened at Room to Read. I'm sure people sitting here who have seen the instruction design of Room to Read has seen those three circles, the three famous three golas, is actually started appearing that orality, exposure to variety of text, and orthographic expertise have to come together in a structured format for the child everyday practice in the classroom. This was a time when the SERI, actually the scale up that happened in Uttarakhand was under SERI, and here this year the SERI project also became a part of learning at scale study, and we took up the learnings from Uttarakhand and Chhattisgarh to other states as well. This is the year when I think 2019 Literacy at Scale seminar happened, where Dr. Shonali Nag also talked about the orthographic density and the impact on teaching learning. Reading campaign is another very interesting event that we do every year, where we reach beyond the schools and the community that we work with, helping people to understand the importance of literacy and reading books. But let's hear from her.
To start us with a little bit of a detour, what is literacy learning? What are the processes that it straddles? It's useful to think of literacy learning as straddling two processes. One is about the writing system or orthography, and the other is about the language or the linguistic system. And at the bottom there in Hindi, you have the word for the picture there, which is a chicken or murgi. And basically to be able to understand that particular print in terms of the sound that it maps to and the meaning that that word will give us. And it's in the interaction of those three domains of the mind, the orthography and its processing, the phonology and its processing, and the words and their semantics, that perhaps are the underpinnings of learning to read. In some of my work, I've argued that these three perhaps have become the primary ways of looking at learning to read because of the kinds of languages in which we've done most of our research. We now know from the research that's been done with Chinese and with Indian languages that maybe we should also put up there visual processing, we should put up there visual motor processing. So those also, I think, are important foundations to learning to read and write.
All right, and with this we come to year 2020, COVID strike. I think it was a very difficult year in the human history, where all of us sitting here in wherever organization we were, we actually had to step back, reflect that how during these difficult times the learning journey of the children that we are working with continues. There was also a big debate about the digital divide that India has. If I have to reach children, do I even have the access to that? Do they have an access to that? Up till now, we were working on the print, but how does reading through digital medium looks like? Does brain learn to read in the same way on the print as well as on digital, or something else happens in the brain? What happens when at foundational stage children are giving digital medium? So there were a lot of debates and a lot of discussion happening at Room to Read as well, and instead of responding immediately, we took a step back and we created Home as a Learning Space program. We also created avenues to reach to the children, but the reading in print was still a dominant theme. We created a lot of community libraries during this time as well. During this time, we had an intense discussion with Dr. Marion Wolf, who helped us understand how actually reading happens with the digital device. So let's hear from her.
What we are doing in our work is connecting cognitive neuroscience with education. And we do so that we are bringing research about the reading brain and applying it to how children learn and how we can teach. And it, as a result, is going to reflect the medium upon which it is reading. This is a really important point for our talk today, because I know that India, like countries around the world, are being faced with a very difficult choice whether to have our children all online and reading and learning on the screen for much of their education, or whether there should be a hybrid model of print and digital.
So yes, we were also struggling with the same dilemma. So with that, I think I would request all of you to take out a minute and actually read what is there on the screen instead of me talking about. And there are two frames, this and the next one, which I request you to read, and we will delve deeper into our next session of the roundtable that Shakti is going to lead. So kindly take out
just to add to that, all of the video snippets that you saw are available with us
and
for you to have a look, because they're about 20-30 minute videos. I mean, so we just showed snippets there, but it's a long video, and
available on our YouTube channel.
Available on our YouTube channel. We'll make it available also.
Yeah.
And we'll have to just cut it off, and
sure.
We've done quite a bit.
I know it was a spree, but over to you, all of you. Please take out a minute to kindly go through it.
And we can ask for some tea and coffee as well. Shall we do that? Yeah.
So let me know once you've gone through this one, and then we'll move on to the next. I hand over the mic to Shakti to take the proceedings ahead. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. So while the tea is getting served, it's indeed a pleasure to have all of you here and brainstorm on this particular topic. The intent of this brainstorm is to help ourselves as practitioners to reflect back on the conceptual basis of whatever we do on the ground. I mean, this is very important for us, that we at least take some time out and think about, okay, we do base our program contours or our program approaches on what the children need, what the community needs, what the government asks. We all do that. But it is also important for us to understand that there is, all of us to have it, consciously, unconsciously, half consciously, we all have a conceptual framework in our heads. It is good to get back to that and see how that is getting shaped. So my first question, I have questions for all of you. Let me start with Dheer, and I would keep the format this way, that while he speaks and he finishes speaking, if anyone wants to ask a question or add a comment, please do that, and we'll just take it to the next person. So Dheer, we know that you don several hats. You've been part of the government, you've advised the government, you're an academician, you're a practitioner. Quite a mixture of portfolios which gives you various perspectives about what is your conceptual framework, or what is that you're advising the government on. So my question would be, like, would you just share what you personally think about the notion of a science of reading, the notion of a conceptual framework for reading? What is your personal journey like?
So what I'm going to say is really, as you said, Shakti, about a personal journey, and then of course that seamlessly comes into Language and Learning Foundation. And when I started my journey, obviously didn't have a great perspective of all kinds of things, and therefore what came from the so-called science of reading was influential, right? If Stanislas Dehaene or Dehaene says that functional MRIs are saying this is happening in the brain, boss, iske aage kuch ho nahi sakta hai. Like it's evidence. Like this is how the brain is functioning. So that at that time it was like, okay, this is evidence, and this is how things happen, right? Of course, there's been a journey; it's evolved. The science of reading is actually a sort of diverse field with cognitive psychology, developmental psychology, neuroscience, education, linguists, etc. Well, the one common thing is that there's usually an experimental or a quasi-experimental design. That's how they would define it at the bottom. And of course, there is brain imaging, etc. In some studies, not always, but it is an experimental design. And a belief that educators, teachers, would benefit from taking this evidence to the classroom, because that's the best way children would learn. That's the weight behind the science of reading. And what influenced me initially were some of these, which all of you are aware of. How does reading happen in the brain? The simple view of reading, everyone's heard of that. And then, of course, the Scarborough's rope, which is a more elaborate version of that. So that's something that I just wanted to say what had influenced me. And then the fact that reading is not natural. There is no specific part allocated to reading, while we know that spoken language is most natural. There's talk of an acquisition device, etc. But the fact that reading happens in different parts of the brain which are not meant for reading, that was influential. And Dehaene or Dehaene, what is it?
Dehaene, that's
Dehaene?
what we call him. Okay. I don't know what he would call himself.
Yeah, so I only heard him, so he's not taken his own name, so I don't know. So the fact that there is this letterbox area for the visual form of the word, and unless that gets activated, that gets developed, and it's shown that those individuals who are not literate, that area is not developed, is really crucial. And therefore, most of the reading scientists, what we heard was that the relationship between letters and sounds is crucial. That if it doesn't get activated, then reading doesn't happen, and therefore phonics instruction is crucial. In some ways, this was also a response to the whole language influential work that was happening at that time, and this was therefore counterbalancing or sort of pushing back on that, and because of that, the phonics movement got a big boost because of many of these reading scientists. So this was influential. The reading is not one place in the brain. Lots of processes happen in different places. Of course, everyone knows this, that there's letters, sounds, meanings. One pathway, which I believe is called dorsal pathway for some reason, is that you get from spelling to sound to meanings, right? This is when you are decoding, you actually decode, and then you get to the meaning, right? Which is the process that happens either when you have an unfamiliar word or in the beginning, that's what happens. And the shorter route, which is called ventral or sight reading, is basically when you get the word and get its meaning straight away. It's like a short circuit, right? And that influences fluent reading. That was influential. That there are two pathways, and we have to initially ensure that the first pathway develops very well, which is from letters to sounds to meanings, but that's not enough to develop skilled reading. And what you need to do, therefore, is that you need to have a lot of reading and a lot of practice to help the pathway from the visual form to meaning directly, right? And obviously, oral language plays a huge part in short-circuiting this, because oral language helps to connect sound and meanings. So that was very useful. Again, this was a simple view of reading. All of you are aware of this at the top. And then a slightly more elaborate version, which I also saw Shailaja talk about the other day on fluency, her talk. But again, very influential for us, at least at that time, was that word recognition is important, but language comprehension is equally important, if not more, whatever. So, and language comprehension has got several parts to it. Vocabulary is not the only one. You've got language structures, to be able to reason, etc. And why I'm pointing out these few are because they have influenced our work, my work, into what we then mainstream through our courses in Language and Learning Foundation. And then, of course, at that time, there was the NRP and everyone talking about the big five. We were still skeptical about the big five at that time, but everywhere this was what was being talked about. We thought that including these components is important, but there shouldn't be a curriculum that is based entirely in a scope and sequence that's based on these skills only, right? Because again, as referring to Shailaja's lecture, fluency is not one direct, you can't don't work on fluency. So very mindful of the fact that all this was happening, but still a strong influence of some of those. For example, this study, this is University of Oslo, this is the last one I'm going to refer to in the science of reading questions. Huh? It's Oslo University. I have the reference here. Now, many people have said that most of the variance in reading comprehension is explained by decoding and language skills. So they, of course, is a large-scale study, longitudinal study. They also came up that 99% of the variance is explained by these two, right? The simple view of reading is a product, right? Reading comprehension equals word recognition multiplied by this. However, what they said, the relationship is not linear. Many people have said that, but they showed it through evidence. I'm only quoting those which are large-scale experimental designs. It says it's curvilinear, which means that when children are learning to decode, decoding skills are a high predictor of reading comprehension variance, right? But as decoding skills improve, it's language skills that become the most important in predicting reading comprehension. In a way, decoding skills are what is called constrained skills. वो time bound manner में develop हो जाता है. Of course, develop नहीं होता है तो problem है, like in our systems. That's a challenge then. And this study, of course, particularly for me was important because it kept saying that oral language skills are the most important influence. This is ages 4 to 9. And in a way, they predict how children will do both on decoding and reading comprehension. So that's what the study was. It's a longitudinal, large-scale study. So how did we use some of this? Just the last point here. One, focus on oral language development. We drew from this language comprehension is very important. Language comprehension can initially be built only through oral language development, higher order questions, right? Somewhere we read, and today till date I'm not sure about what it is, that the brain processes, Shailaja and Shakti, the oral inputs and visual inputs in a similar manner, right? So we started to say that वो सुना हो या पढ़ा हो, एक ही तरीके से ब्रेन में उसका प्रोसेसिंग होगा, उसका तर्क होगा. तो अगर ये वाली कैपेसिटी हम डेवलप कर लेते हैं ओरल लैंग्वेज में बहुत सारी बातचीत करके, तो वो रीडिंग में ट्रांसफर हो जाएगी. नेवर नो वेदर दिस इज द करेक्ट इंटरप्रिटेशन, बट यूजिंग अ लिटिल बिट ऑफ दैट टू से दैट strong language comprehension is very important. Reading is not natural, therefore systematic decoding, even if it is decontextualized, and that's the fight with people who stick more to a whole language approach or a word approach, as some people say. That is what we got. And I think after that, this one, the last one, is something that we always emphasize, and there's enough evidence, again from brain research, to say that if there are strong positive relationships, then actually neural pathways are stronger, thicker, actually physically thicker. So some of these we've used in our courses and in our designs to the extent we wanted it. And today, or is it yesterday, there's an article by Rohini Nilakani about play. Yes, yeah. Yesterday. Play improves, there's brain research which says that improves neuroplasticity, etc. So I think we should use science of reading to push certain things that we also believe are correct and good for children, right? So that's the way but some of this did shape my thinking and did shape the way LLF thought about it later. And I just come to the limitations. If I can finish in one go, just a couple of slides.
Please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sorry, one more point here. Reading is a complex process that we picked up and we kept emphasizing, because anywhere you go, teachers say reading, अरे क्या है बच्चे को कब आ जाएगा, तो सबसे पहला हमारा सेशन इसी से शुरू होता है. रीडिंग इज अ कॉम्प्लेक्स प्रोसेस. ये एक सिम्फनी है, ऑर्केस्ट्रा है, जिसमें बहुत सारे वाद्य यंत्र हैं, कोई अलग अलग काम होगा, तब जाके रीडिंग होगा. सो that I think even for our teams was good to understand how reading is so complex, and there I think the science of reading, the brain research and different things happening together all the time was very crucial. I missed that point. So where do I think science of reading is inadequate? I mean, Stuti has pointed out some already. It was mentioned by you also, Purnima, in the beginning. I think that comprehension, and I'm sure Shailaja has talked about the same things. I hope there's no. So comprehension, if you look at reading, the science of reading, they're really concerned with what? Decoding and a broad understanding of the theme and topic. These two come together, you can comprehend. That's it. There's not much more there is to it. But we know that there are large number of literacy devices in education, right? Deeper inference, interpretation. How do you interpret with your own lives and society and what's happening around you? Reading with a critical lens, expressing opinions, authentic conversations, reading for a purpose, motivation to read. All of that science of reading does not address really strongly, at least. So I think in comprehension, they do say that the science of reading advocates talk about comprehension as the goal of reading. Yes. But the comprehension they talk about is not this multifaceted, deep, diverse kind of comprehensions. That's one thing that I have a quarrel with. Second is, the science of reading has given rise to assessment tools which are very narrow. Right? You go to any we're also now victims of that, right? And we do this ourselves. Go to a classroom, stopwatch खोला, चलाया, बोलो. 60 years. और उसके बाद 2-3 questions पूछ लिए, उसका score डाल दिया, उसमें क्या है, and give a numerical score. उसका reading ability has been captured in a score, right? Which is not what reading is. As all of you said, reading is a complex, very complex and deep kind of activity where an individual is interacting with a text and making her own meaning out of it, right? But science of reading has resulted in these assessments. That is the real story, whether it's EGRA or any others. And this is from a 2021 New York City schools. Their vision statement says, critical, you can see the highlighted blues above, all great things, but what is used to assess? They've got this stopwatch and the teacher brings the children for 6, all about critical competencies, critical literacy, culturally relevant, all of that, when you come to assess, like, stopwatch nikala, 60 सेकंड में बोलो जो बोलना है करके खत्म. So obviously there's a big conflict between what's happening. That was my problem number 1 about comprehension and assessment. And I've chosen just 3 problems which appeal to me. I mean, there are many more, I'm sure, if you will point out. The second is, as has been mentioned again, these about multilingual contexts. And as, I think as Minati said there, multilingual context which are even difficult to define. उसका language level नहीं है. Fluidity इतना है उसमें that यहाँ क्या language बोल रहे हैं, वहाँ क्या language बोल रहे हैं, वो गुजराती से influenced है, वो किससे influenced है. You can't even give it a name, right? And there is that very highly structured approach doesn't work that much. Because that some of these approaches assume that oral fluency is there, and therefore, you know, you have that triangle of letters, spelling and meaning, but वहाँ तो है ही नहीं वो, that meaning also doesn't exist. That meaning is different for a particular shape, etc., or whatever. So it doesn't. There's a challenge there, and all the other issues about how does language transfer happen. How do children, how much of L2, L1 should be used, when, what kind of mixing of languages is appropriate, how is it calibrated to what children know at that time, their language repertoire at that time, kitna kya jante hain, very complex, you know. And how do you assess such children? Kya, if in the language which is the medium of instruction, you find children are not reading, not answering your comprehension question, do we say comprehension is low? Or what else do we do? There are the things that we need to do that, right? And there is an emerging scientific base. When I say scientific, I'm just saying which is being done in a systematic research methods based manner, emerging for multilingual, bilingual work as well. I'm not saying it's not there, but many of these questions are not fully answered in the varied context that we have. So that's the second struggle with the structured science of reading kind of. So I looked at, for example, meta-linguistic transfer is very crucial for multilingual context. आप कुछ चीज़ जानते हो एक language में, उससे learn करके दूसरे में. I could not even understand this diagram, I must confess, but the point is this, that it's not straightforward like the simple view of reading.
Absolutely.
So many things that are happening there. You know, whether meta-linguistic awareness has been activated or not, what are the universal things, L2 की क्या differences है, L1 से, context, languages, so many things. So I just copied this diagram to say that, you know, that simplistic understanding of a structure and science of reading doesn't always work. That was my problem number 2. Problem number 3 is, of course, the fact that a lot of the SOR work does not look into contexts and what different contexts mean for children, and and there, I think there are lots of examples of how it's quite inadequate in terms of describing what kind of text should be used. For example, you know, texts have really a big influence on, or even how is science of reading going to address what's happening on the right hand side? There is nothing, no equation, no research that is going to tell us how this is going to happen, right? It's a mix of various things. But just getting back to this, there are homegrown approaches like Varna Samuh come up in different parts, including Kirti's work and others. Blocks, right? I mean, there are of course Western block models also, but we've also got this is not flowing directly from the science of reading. To say that you should dedicate a time for oral language is an invention, at least for us in an Indian context, because teachers कराते नहीं है वो. अब क्या कहा है कि 30 मिनट को आपको सिर्फ oral language ही करना है. There's a period assigned to it in Uttar Pradesh for 40 minutes where you have to do only oral language. Now it seems very odd, right? I mean, oral language should be built into everything. It is built into others also. But the idea is that what works, if you are going to say इस समय सिर्फ आप read aloud करेंगे या बच्चों को कहानी सुनाएंगे, बच्चों के साथ conversation होगा, maybe in Indian context that's how it works better. But something will happen in those 20 minutes, 40 minutes, sorry. So looking into the limitations of the administrative issues, मल्टीलिंगुअल में तो खैर वो आइडेंटिटी इश्यूज भी बहुत स्ट्रांग है, कहाँ पर स्ट्रांग है, कहाँ पर नहीं स्ट्रांग है. All these cannot be captured in a scientific framework. So science की जगह है, बहुत ज़रूरी है, but then you've got to build on it from a lot of things. If we were to say this is what science is saying, आप बोलते हो the UP government says पर हम तो ऐसा नहीं कर सकते, and you don't compromise. No, we have to compromise. We have to see what can work, right? And we do these compromises all the time. How can you build in a time when you can do something specific for oral language, for example? What do you do in an area where the community itself is not strongly in favor of their language coming into the classroom? Gold standard is mother tongue based multilingual education, 5 to 7 years of language in the instruction in the language the child is familiar with, and then transfer that happens to another language which you want to use as a medium of instruction. If that doesn't work, what do? Are you going to say, if that doesn't work, nothing should be done? Or are we willing to look at alternatives that may be imperfect, but still help children? After all, what is the idea? The idea is that to help children to be able to learn and feel confident in the early years, right? What can be done for that? So if the science is not offering you a solution, then you've got to think of what can be done, what is appropriate for that context. And my last point, of course, is that science of reading depends a lot on experimental designs, and nowadays we've got lots of people talking about A/B testing and RCTs, and that's the only way that's recognized to establish scientific evidence, scientific in inverted commas. Now the question is, does A/B testing and RCT work in many contexts? Because education is so multi-dimensional. इतने सारे stakeholders हैं, बच्चा कहीं से background से आ रहा है, घर पे print है कि नहीं, क्या language बोलते हैं, there's a stakeholder called the teacher, the most important, there are the administrators, all of them. We've had a big problem looking at A/B testing and RCT. So again, establishing scientific evidence is a challenge. I think that was the last. So my only point is this, that so the only point that in the end I say evidence is very crucial. We say oral language is important. We keep saying that. And finally, Sonali Nag, as you mentioned, collaborated with us and did a scientific DID kind of work in a small number of schools.
Absolutely.
That's now published. It's going to be published. It's presented as scientific evidence. It's important. While we are pushing for oral language work, we generally give a lot of logic and common sense logic, but that's important, right? So I think what's crucial is, how do we use science to promote the objectives and what we think is appropriate, and do that and use that, advocate, but not let that overwhelm us. But I have been influenced by a lot of work that's happened, which is called science of reading, with these limitations. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Dhir. In fact, that resonates so well with us here in Room to Read, because I think one of our major learnings was also that so when we saw science of reading encapsulated in the National Reading Panel in 2000, the way it was done, and if I'm allowed to be blasphemous, we felt claustrophobic. And after that, when I look at the different things that cognitive neuroscientists tell us are actually very soothing and comforting, the entire notion of science is also expanding in a sense, silently probably. That is not getting reflected in our work as yet, but I think the science horizon is also understanding that it can't be only too prescriptive, and what's most important is that probably science itself does not create these prescriptions. These prescriptions are created somewhere else. The science is just a research. So I would ask Now Shailaja. So Shailaja is an academician who works very closely with us practitioners. So there is a
Rare breed. I must say.
Rare breed, and give opinions and insights. But there is something that probably we need to know. She is someone who had seen from very close quarters the building up of the National Reading Panel 2000 when she was herself in the US. So some snippets of that as well, if you could just share with us.
I thought that Dheer has expressed pretty much all I have to say. So I thought that I would just say, you know, by the way, Dheer broke a contract he had with me. We both said, we both said we'll come unprepared and make off-the-cuff remarks. We both, we both secretly prepared. But I did not make slides. But anyway, he's pretty much said all that I have to say. So I will just say, I mean, I have a few points, so I'll repeat in case repetition is helpful. I'll repeat. But as Shakti said, I was a PhD student in the US between 1996 and 2002. And anybody who knows the science of reading will know that those were very crucial years. What I would add to that is that the United States government used to give a federal 5-year grant to a university to anchor cutting-edge reading research. Every 5 years, it used to move to a different university. For a very long time, University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign held it during the 80s and the early 90s for a period of 3 5-year terms, after which it moved to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where I was. It's just so happened that the Center for Improvement in Early Reading Achievement, or Sierra, as it was called, was anchored by my PhD dissertation advisor, Dr. Elfrida Hebert, as well as another scholar who I respect greatly, called Dr. David Pearson. So David and Freddie were the co-directors of this, center, and I was Freddie's doctoral student. So quite coincidentally, I happened to have a ringside seat to many of the national discussions. People used to come, top people who are cited everywhere, used to come to Ann Arbor and sit outside of Freddie's office and talk to us. So I just happened to have a ringside seat. When I started my doctoral studies, we were still in the era of, you can broadly call it whole language, but nobody called it whole language at that point in time. It was a process-based understanding of reading. We had people like Elizabeth Sulsby teaching us, who was a pioneer of emergent literacy. We had Anne-Marie Palanza, who was a comprehension person. We had people who were talking about the interrelationships between reading and writing. As you rightly said, where is writing today? We had children's literature people, and we were taught, I began my doctoral studies with a very rich understanding of what science means. In fact, the word science was not used as much as research or evidence. Through the course of the 6 years of my PhD, I saw a discourse being shaped around evidence that lies outside of the evidence itself. So I saw a shifting of the discourse, and I want to sort of cue you all to understanding that just what Shakti said, that science is never in the facts alone, but in the shaping of interpretations and conversations around the facts. And I saw a shift in that. And that was seen by most of us who were present at that time as a loss and as a political move, which was not at all unknown in the history of United States, which in the reading field has only seen pendulum swings, which are entirely politically motivated. So, I mean, both ends are always politically motivated. This is common knowledge. So when we saw that shift, and bear in mind that this happened around the time of an important political election. In 2000, we had George Bush come to power and a back to basics kind of a movement coming up. So the shift in the science that accompanied was not a surprise to those of us who were living in that country at that time. But as we know, in our own country, when certain political discourses sort of take hold, sometimes they have a stranglehold. They have a stranglehold. They choke everything else. And at that point, nobody can speak out. We, in our country, have experienced this in other contexts. So we know. And there is such discrediting of other perspectives. At that moment, it is impossible to argue. All you can do is survive and stay alive. And keep believing that this is not right, and there will come a time to speak the truth. But this is not the time, because you have somebody choking all other voices. And I think, with due respect, that the NRP was that kind of a stranglehold on conversations. It was not a time when we could say after the NRP that socials, by the way, look at science being used. Look at science and look at the way the word science has been used. We are talking about a settled science of reading. Have you come across this term, settled science of reading?
Yes.
If you believe in science and if you understand what science is never settled. If somebody tells you that there's a settled science, you immediately know that this cannot be the truth. Because science, by definition, is an ongoing investigation and ongoing conversations and debates and all of that. Science is never settled. So, as the inimitable Subir Shukla, who I was speaking to yesterday, said, truth is a range. If anybody reduces truth to a fine line, that cannot be the truth. Likewise, science cannot be settled. So the very fact that they were talking about a settled science of reading, and the NRP, as I said, came out in 2000, where we saw that, as I'm saying, all the literature basis that I had been exposed to during the first 4 years of my doctoral studies was now not scientific. It was not scientific. So we can't talk about emergent literacy. We can't talk about, writing research. We can't talk about literature. None of this mattered anymore. So we cannot talk about anything except the quasi-experimental and the experimental designs. And social science knowledge built on this kind of knowledge base has got to be extremely fragile and extremely impoverished. So that was very clear to all of us. At the same time, and another thing of when you know it is a highly politicized debate is when you discredit the other side to a point of ridicule, where you say, Pappu. And then it's like, ha ha ha, I'm sorry, you may not understand the Indian references to this. When you reduce...
Austin said he would.
Okay. When you reduce your opponent to a superficial point of ridicule, that is political. When you say the equivalent of Pappu in reading research was queuing systems. If you said queuing systems, then you knew this is something to be ridiculed, not to be taken seriously, discredited completely. Misquoting your adversaries. For example, when Ken Goodman wrote his dissertation, reading a psycholinguistic guessing game, if you read his actual dissertation, by the way, I'm not saying that Ken Goodman was right in everything he said or did. Please don't think, I'm just giving an alternative perspective. When he used the word guessing, it was used to ridicule that reading, he's turned it into a guessing game, because that's literally what his title said, the title of his dissertation. But if you read his dissertation and not just the title of it, it is what you would today call prediction, and you would teach it as a scientific cognitive reading strategy. It's kosher, it's valid if you call it prediction, but if you call it guessing, it is ridiculed. So if you go beyond titles and read, take the time to understand people, to not put words into their mouth, but allow them to speak in their own complexity and depth, perhaps you'll find more points of agreement than disagreement in this conversation. Right? So it became like Hawas were created. Lucy Calkins became another Hawa. The Hawas created, whenever Hawas are created, it's a highly politicized debate. You need to step back from it and see what is the truth, not get carried away by the currents. But just as today, after the Indian elections, we can say Rahul Gandhi, and we don't need to say Pappu. It doesn't mean that any battles have been won, but it means that people can name their opponents with respect. Likewise, I believe, because in India we are always 20 or 25 years behind the swings, there now small wins are being seen for people who argue for complexity. Small wins. The big fellow is still there, still in power. But already the pendulum is shifting. I'm following the conversations there closely, and I'm telling you that it will take us another 20 years to realize that it is shifting slightly. So I was just wondering, Shakti asked me a couple of weeks ago, and I told him I won't prepare and I won't speak and all of that. I said many things to him. But then...
I knew you would.
I have much more to say. May I please speak? So, yes. So I was sitting 2 days ago saying, "Arey Shakti ke liye kuch prepare hi nahi kiya, kya karo?" At that point, so David Pearson and Freddie Hebert, I told you, were the co-directors. So when all the science of reading was happening, and David Pearson's highly respected person, I respect him tremendously. He's very balanced, very solid. He doesn't take any extreme stances. Freddie Hebert actually can be a little more extreme, so I follow David Pearson more closely. So I used to write to him. We are connected still. So I would write to him and say, "Did you see this? Did you see that? And why aren't you speaking up?" But there is a time when, as I said, in such political conversations, you cannot speak because you will not be heard. And he's wise enough to know that you have to keep working and keep working without necessarily taking on your opponents in the wrong political climate. You have to keep doing the groundwork for that. So there have been a couple of things that have come out in the recent past, and one of them is a book by Robert Tierney and David Pearson that came out just this year. It is called Fact-Checking the Science of Reading. And I was just thinking, he announced this book a couple of months ago, and I was thinking I have to buy it and read it, when you won't believe it. 2 days ago, he put out the executive summary of this book. So I read it, and please, I mean, I'm going to plagiarize freely. It is, but I say speak with emotion because I believe what he's saying. So it is my thoughts as much as his, even though these are his words in which I'm going to present to you. I'm going to summarize a few points from this executive summary, adding my own interpretation to it, obviously not exactly his words. So one, of course, that science by its very nature is provisional, it is not settled, etc. And even physical scientists, by the way, this I'm adding, this is not from his thing. Even physical scientists understand that there is a leap between the facts and the interpretation. That is called theorizing. Yeah. Theorizing. So we know that even physical science is not derived merely from facts. We know that there is a theory that guides and makes sense of the facts, and to deny and to say that the facts speak for themselves is not, clearly is a red flag. And Dheer has already said that the kind of evidences that were used dismisses a very large set of evidences that need to be brought back into the conversation, especially about writing, especially about oral language, especially about literature, especially about motivation, self-regulation, contextual factors, etc. Now, third point I want to say, which Dheer alluded to, which is that culture, social and cultural factors are missing in this purely neurocognitive explanation of reading. Now, what do I mean by that? What does it mean to say that reading is a social and cultural process? Purnima and I have had a long conversation about this, which is on YouTube. But the fact that literacy by itself, you know, the fact that I can decode words or even understand that what I have read, does not tell me how my culture or my society is putting to use this capability. And this shifts in every culture and during every time period. So it is possible that there would have been a time period when just simply decoding in order to, I don't know, I mean, the functions, for example, if it is a religious, maybe it's to memorize the religious text. That could have been the function. In that case, you need a certain kind of a capability to do that. In another culture, it could be that you've not yet come to a digital age, so you need to read and understand. Now, in this digital age, we are using it also in a very, very different way. The nature of knowledge, the nature of society, etc. is fast changing. You need parallel processing, a lot of ability to synthesize information, to critically read, to know your sources. All of this is defining literacy. So what we mean by literacy can never be reduced to how we are decoding the script and how we are deriving meaning from the script. So even those who are most progressive amongst us talk about reading as decoding plus meaning making. But meaning making for what purpose? How are we going to use this meaning? We have to step beyond the text to know that. And that can never be decided by neuroimaging studies, which are giving important points of input, but partial points of input. So the Journal of Reading Behaviors, which was our foremost journal, became about 10 or 15 years ago the Journal of Literacy Research. Reading behavior became literacy research. That is one of our top journals. So why are we reducing literacy back to reading? When actually what we need is a much broader understanding of what you are doing with reading, including writing, including purposes, etc. So let us not reduce literacy to cognitive events in the brain that can be captured by brain scans. Brain scans can give us very promising information on which areas of the brain are active during an act of reading. But it can never tell us what more needs to be done along with all of this, these active areas coming together. Even assume that you can turn this brain scan into a perfect replication of curriculum and pedagogy, which you never can, because there is a jump there. Even if you can, what are you going to accomplish? What are you going to accomplish? You'll have people who can decode, but to what purpose? So those purposes of literacy need to be brought front and center into our conversation, and they can never be captured by brain scans alone. Sorry, I've got my notes here. Another thing I want to say, this is like a 101 in philosophy of education. This is also not from David's article, but David's book, but my own thought. When we teach philosophy of education, one of the first things we teach is that education is normative. Normative means education alludes to what should be. Science alludes to what is. Science can never tell you what should be. Science can tell you how to build an atom bomb. Science cannot tell you, should you deploy the atom bomb? Should an atom bomb be created? Do we want to be a society with an atom bomb? It cannot answer these questions. Science is about facts and interpretations of those facts. Science cannot tell you what kind of a society to create. Science cannot tell you, should India be multilingual? In terms of its education policy, it cannot tell you what should we be. Should we have an equitable education system? It cannot answer that. If you want multilingual education, how does the multilingual's brain work when it is learning to read? It can answer that. But should we? Do we value? Do we have the resources? Do we have the systemic processes? It cannot answer any of that. What should we value? These are normative questions. These are questions that educators ask. These are not answers that cognitive scientists can give us. So any attempt by cognitive scientists or developmental psychologists to hijack educational conversations must be met with polite, thank you very much, and here is your seat at our table. Here is your seat at our table. Please give them a seat at your table, but your table cannot be run by them. That, I feel, is extremely important. There are limitations to what science has to offer to this conversation. Lots of promise, but also some limitations. As educators, we need to firmly keep the conversation in our control. That is one set of things about what I feel about science. Then now let me talk about the simple view of reading. The simple view of reading. which already Dheer has talked about, that it says oral language plus decoding equals reading. But as I've already said, we also want dispositions, attitudes, motivation, self-regulation, etc. to sort of be factored in, which are not being factored in. These are extremely important. In fact, there's another 2020 report called, which was a synthesis looking at 6 reading for understanding, long longitudinal kind of studies that happened in the United States between 2010 and 2016. And basically they found that both oral language and self-regulation are extremely important factors that are completely sort of sidelined. Even though simple view of reading says decoding plus oral language is not really given its space within these conversations. And other extraneous factors like self-regulation, like intent or interest in reading, those have extremely important effects which are not sort of considered. So we need to question and challenge what it is about the simple view of reading that we wish to retain. And yes, there are things that we need to retain, but also what the important limitations are. Another thing that the simple view of reading tells us quite correctly, I would say, and I teach this to my students, so please don't think I'm an imbalanced voice, because I think they really made us see certain flaws with what had been there prior to their sort of taking over the conversation, is that learning to decode is not a natural act like learning to speak. I think this was, to my mind, this is one of the most important limitations of whole language and Ken Goodman's work, where he said that learning to read is as natural as learning to speak. And that is not the truth. And the simple view of reading sort of brought this to our attention, that learning to decode is not a very natural act and needs support and scaffolding. But there is another very, very natural act that our brains are wired to do other than oral language. And can you guess what that is? Other than oral language, there's a very important thing that is natural for human brains that it is wired to do, which is not the script. Speaking oral language, I said other than oral language. Is pattern recognition. Pattern recognition. So when we say that learning to read is not a natural act, yes and no. Learning, the script is not a natural act, but learning anything, let us say learning a car. Do you think our brains were wired to learn to drive a car? No. We have piggybacked on certain other processes. Like that, learning any skill, learning piano, learning violin, are these natural acts? No. But over time, our brains are definitely wired to extract certain patterns, and this gives us the capacity to learn anything. We are designed and wired to learn. So learning to read is not an entirely unnatural act. Here I'm citing Tierney and Pearson. This is not my own fundas. They have looked carefully at the research and they have summarized it. This is from the executive summary that I'm citing. Learning patterns is very, very natural. As early as 1995, Scher and Stano, which I read them back in the days, talked about something called the self-teaching hypothesis. The self-teaching hypothesis is that children do pick up certain things about orthography which are not systematically taught to them. Now, Kirti Jairam, who runs this OELP, and Dheer has alluded to her Varna Samuh approach. She always tells me, do you know, Shelja, we have 6 Varna Samuhs, Varna Samuh being clusters of letters that are taught explicitly and systematically to children. But she says, I don't know how it is, but we spend the maximum time on the first Varna Samuh. We don't spend equal amounts of time. Little less time on the second Varna Samuh, a little less time on the third Varna Samuh. And then she says, Shelja, we rarely need to teach the 4th, 5th and 6th Varna Samuhs. Why is this? Why is this that I rarely need? There are some children who I need to sit with for the 4th, 5th and 6th, but how do they learn letters that I have not taught them explicitly if learning to read the script is not a natural act and it needs systematic, explicit scaffolding? So now this is where phonics has been overstated, according to me. And I invite, being of a scientific disposition, I would love for us to investigate this together and for you to come back and tell me you were wrong, because that is a part of science. This is I'm just speculating right now without evidence. So if we find that equal amounts of time are not needed for the curriculum, the phonics curriculum, what's going on in the child's mind? The child has already abstracted so many patterns and so much else that it's making use of its natural capability to extract those features with explicit systematic scaffolding in the early period. So towards the fag end, you may not need that much of time. All this is worthy of investigation is all I'm saying. I'm not stating this as conclusive. I'm just saying let us not completely throw off the table this capability for pattern recognition. So that is another point. Regarding the 3 queuing systems, which are a bad word, I would like to respectfully bring them back into the conversation, because I think that as good scientists, we should be willing to look at, is it only eye movements, orthographic mapping, etc. that permits reading? Or if we give it in other terms like prediction, are you saying that the other 2 queuing systems have nothing to offer? One couldn't ask this question 10 years ago. One couldn't ask this question 5 years ago, because you'd be booed as somebody who's not up to date with research. Today I can ask this question. Can we look, are we saying conclusively that I'm not trying to say that we need to teach reading through guessing. This is not my thing. Are you really saying that the semantic system and the syntactic system have nothing to offer?
No way.
Does that make sense to us?
No.
So that, the straw people, especially Lucy Calkins and so on, we need to bring the straw people back, treat them with respect and investigate what they are saying. Not turn them into straw figures and dismiss them. Investigate what they are saying. May I take 5 more minutes?
Yeah, please.
5 more minutes. Implementation. Implementation, as Dheer again has said, there's so much in implementation that the science of reading, there are facts about the reading brain, there are facts about orthography, phonology, mapping. How does this translate into implementation? Again, yesterday Subir and I were talking, and he was talking about the fact that relationships, and not just the relationships that you were alluding to, not just the positive relationships that the child experiences, but the relationships of all the educational personnel working in classrooms, in contexts and systems, as well as the educational processes, are so valid to how we all, each one of us, conducts our work. We know that it is not possible to jump from evidence done in experimental research directly to an implementation, because those implementation models are not tested at all. So if you're talking about scientific research, how is some quasi-experimental research done somewhere in the US of A going to serve as the right model for work that we are doing here in a completely different context? Because none of those conditions may hold, only few of those conditions may hold. So if you're again going to insist on evidence, where is the evidence from our country for this? And are you trying to tell me that because the reading brain is so value neutral, none of the fact that the entire educational establishment is different, curriculum, pedagogy, teacher education, all of this is different, that none of this will matter to the implementation of evidence of a culture-free reading brain in the US to here? I do not see that. I do not see that. So I would say, what is it that would work in terms of implementation? This is something that we need to create culturally valid models of before relying on this idea that the reading brain, I hear you, I have heard what you've said about the culture, this thing. Whether it is in Finland or in Norway or here or in the US, certain areas of the brain will light up.
Only certain.
Only certain areas. There also I'm with you. I do not contest that. I'm saying so. How do I derive curriculum from this? How do I derive pedagogy? How do I derive teacher education programs? How do I derive a context of whatever? So education is more than the reading brain. And those parts that surround this reading brain need to be also investigated. What models will work, what won't work, etc. We cannot just go from that to that. It is not a seamless jump, as we all know. Yeah. So, and then finally, I want to say that in our country, one of my pet peeves is that we talk very, very casually about teacher training. And many of you have heard me say this, that to my mind, and I'm saying, being controversial, dogs are trained, teachers are educated. Train, educate. Two different words. Train, do as I say. Sit, sit, good. Train, jump, jumped, reward. Implementer, do as I say. Educate, bring forth your capabilities to think with me, along with me, perhaps better than me. We need educated people, not trained implementers. So you can understand where I would be when we come to structured pedagogy. I'm not saying we need unstructured pedagogy, but I think that we need to give scaffolds, supports. I'm not saying leave it entirely. I understand. I'm not an ivory tower academic. I go to field settings. I understand that teachers need critical scaffolds. I believe children also need critical scaffolds, and phonics is a critical scaffold. I'm all for teaching phonics. I'm all for giving teachers supports, but not direct implementers of structured pedagogy. Hence, my stance on the science of implementation is also going to be a bit controversial. I would like to end with a poem, since this talk has been sort of derived from David Pearson's thinking. It has got me thinking and saying things in my own words. He put this up around Christmas. Have you all heard this? On the first day of Christmas, ta-da-da-da-da. That one? I can't sing, obviously, but I will just sing. On the first day of reading, my science gave to me a simple view of reading. On the second day of reading, my science gave to me 2 CVCs. You all know what CVC is, right?
Yeah.
2 CVCs and a simple view of reading. On the third day of reading, my science gave to me 3 phonics rules, 2 CVCs, and a simple view of reading. On the third day of reading, my science gave to me 3 phonics rules, 2 CVCs, 4 phonemes blending, and a simple view of reading, and so on. And then he says, and it goes on, and then he says, yeah, and he goes on 7th, 8th day, and then he says, on the 12th, and then he goes to balance, and he says, on the 12th day of balance, so I'm cutting short his poem, my theory gave to me 12 systems queuing, 11 critiques carping, 10 strategies strutting, 9 junctures jumping, 8 morphemes meaning, 7 scaffolds scrambling, 6 schemas scurrying, 5 knowledge funds, 4 purpose setting, 3 motives marching, 2 context shaping, and a complex view of reading.
Thank you, Shailaja. Yes, I mean, I was just remembering, for example, this how we had used this idea for pattern recognition, and while we were teaching, let's say, the more visually complex aksharas, how even when those were untaught, in a sense, children would pick up. At times, they would need help if they would need help with the patterns in which they were shaped up. Usse zyada kabhi zarurat nahi pada, and people could actually, so some level of scaffolded, explicitly learned phonics also gives you an autonomy, and that needs to be recognized. I mean, can I just come back to Karsten? You know, so one of the very comforting things that probably our conversations in Room to Read with the scientists directly, and not just policymakers, I mean, that was one of our saving graces, that we directly spoke to the scientists and asked them, is this what your reading theory telling us? And even on things like taught letters versus untaught letters, we have done all of that. We actually went back to the people, I'm not naming them, and said that, this is what your research is telling me. And they said, my research says this in this context with these qualifying statements. Now please make your own inference. Perfect. We went forward with whatever we had to do. This was in 2016. So one of those conversations was with Dr. Marian Wolf in around 2020. And we asked her many questions on how the reading brain would look like when faced with in a multilingual situation. And how is that context shaping what's going on inside the brain and inside the mind space of the child as well? Is there a way to completely understand that in full? And that's where Dr. Marian, it's in the video. You can see it. And Dr. Marian Wolf says, wonderful question, I do not know. I mean, that was the most comforting thing, when a scientist says, and that's just what a scientist does probably, says that I do not know. And like giving this as a background, I just want to tap into your enormous expertise of, multilingual education in India, and just telling us, how have you seen literacy getting shaped up in all the work that you have done in the early years? So that's to you, Karsten.
I think when we talk with people like there who is very good in working with governments, we tend to be more on the smaller scale. We tend to be more working in the NGO side. And then the government tells us like, well, that's easy talk. How do you scale this up, right? So that's a typical NGO problem. We have worked with some governments like Papua New Guinea. We have been working quite closely with them. Philippines is more recent, where we are working quite closely with them. We have done some stuff like in Orissa and Andhra Pradesh here informally to work with government programs. Mahendra Mishra, for example, is known by some of you, and we work closely with him. So yes, there is some experience, and so in that sense, some evidence-based maybe, but also saying the complexities are enormous. In the practicalities of the NGO world, we have often reduced it too much, assuming that there would be one language per classroom. And a lot of the processes that have been developed in the multilingualism world has been based on that. What do we do? And we have found quite good ways. I think the multi-strategy approach was already around before the science of reading talked about, the decoding and language comprehension, that both need to be together. Multi-strategy was to do both, to do as well the decoding stuff as the holistic approaches, combining those into two types of primers. All kinds of experiments have been happening. But still, how do you deal with multiple languages in one classroom? I feel we're only starting it. We're looking into, some of you might have heard about translanguaging. It's one of the terminologies that has been now around, but is just starting on what do we do with that. I have a colleague, Sang Sok Son, who's coming actually in July to India to also talk about that. Did partly his research here, partly in Thailand. That is kind of looking into that. What can we learn from that in our teaching practices? And that is starting. We do experiments, but I wouldn't say yet we have answers to that. So yes, we know that having multiple languages in the classrooms, bringing it orally, as was said by previous speakers, is very important. Working on comprehension and at the same time working on decoding and doing that simultaneously and build it up together, that has good results. How to make that work, and Anusup has often asked me like, how do you do it in a classroom? You talk with the government officials and they say nice theory. How do you do that at large scale? I think we're still discovering that. And I would say that that's typically something indeed where the world looks at India. Because in most of the Western countries, it is kind of easy. It's Spanish and English. Okay, 2 languages in the classroom. You can do research on that and nice diagrams, and then this is the outcome. If we do it this way, this happens, and we do it that way, that happens, and hooray, we have a theory. Yeah, I think that's the challenge here. What we have where, when we talk into a classroom, I was talking recently with some of the NGOs and, talking with all the staff, and some of them said, yeah, I was recently in a classroom and we started to count languages, and I think they came to 12 among the languages spoken by the children. Wow, that's quite different from Spanish and English and getting over the gap. So I think we are all here to learn that, to experiment, to see what can work in those settings and do that together. So the consortium, some of you are part of that, of multilingual education, we try to look into that. What does this all mean for India? And then learning together. So I don't think I have answers there for you. I'm just setting the context on how we work and how we also as an international organization want to learn together, offer our expertise from other places. One of the things that we are intrigued with that hasn't come yet much to the table today, it was referred to, is how technology and all that can help with that. What does it mean that cell phones are coming to the classroom? What does it mean that children even have nowadays phones in some places? Not everywhere. There is still a gap, but it is increasing. And for example, we have done an experiment in PNG where actually the digital age is actually much lower than India, and have found ways, it's quite interesting, to use digital tools even in villages where there is no electricity, working with solar panels and kind of having reading happening from an LCD projector that runs on a solar panel. And the results are actually quite amazing. I've seen, could show a little 2-minute video clip if you're interested. But those are not yet proven. It's too small for that. This was done with Save the Children in 60 classes. Very promising results. We're at the moment rolling that out in 5 other countries and see if we could replicate it. That scaling up idea. But yes, how can we work also, how can we also use technology in this? AI is of course interesting. We haven't even mentioned the word yet, but there is possibilities there too in larger scale reading materials development that are very localized. And how do you do that? All in development. So these are just a few initial thoughts for further discussion. Is that helpful?
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to add
please,
to Arsen's
please.
multiple situations. One more. About 17 to 20% classrooms in India, the teacher does not know the language of the children.
Yes.
What does it mean to teach reading and literacy there?
Yes.
How will that happen?
Or there are no teachers. Teacher shortages and
That of course, yeah.
Well, and multi-grade. So it's not just multiple languages. You also have sometimes, three grades in one classroom. So you have multiple grades. You have
children at different levels, very different levels.
Yeah,
I mean, I've realized that if we have research grants for the next 100 years, we should be able to answer all the world's problems. Thank you, Karsten. Huh? Absolutely. Okay. Well, Shubhradi, can we come to you with a very similar question?
Oh my God, I am a practitioner, so
even all of us.
Okay. Okay, so just to be very brief, initial years, 80s I'm talking, I was trained in the Montessori method, and that has a very good system of phonics and vocabulary. All the things were in place, and although it was counter to the current that was going on, I mean you couldn't use the word literacy, you couldn't use the word phonics, couldn't use the word decoding in those days. But what we did was we used it when I started working in the rural areas, and we got very good results. So I am not talking about where we got results, because if you do it in a very structured way and the teacher is trained properly and the teacher knows, you get the results. But now I am only struggling. Where we have reached here, I would like to talk a little bit about those struggles. Like we have the methodology in place, it has worked well over a large sample, but now we are right now working in 100 schools in Calcutta. We are at the bottommost layer, in terms of educational index, and they have all kinds of problems. Few teachers, high PTR, children speak a different language, Urdu speaking children in a Bengali medium school. It's a god-awful mess, and we are struggling. We are really struggling. And then on top of that, I have come to realize that, and the most of the children, we have been working with them for last 5 years and very limited success, Shailaja, very limited success. But what I have come to realize that, to for all this good practices to be effective, you need a stable school environment, which is complete, and I think the school environment is becoming increasingly unstable. And in these 5 years, we have had 3 elections. And then, even on paper, it's a 5-teacher school. 3 teachers were on long childcare leave. I mean, and the numbers are huge. So, and we just couldn't make much headway, but we struggled, we did a lot of things, and things improved very, very slowly. But then we looked also, even within the school, there is a lot of variation. When we look at aggregated data, we seem to miss this out. So there is a top layer of children who learn, but then there are some children who just do not learn no matter what you do. And we have our own community learning centers adjacent to these schools, and these children come here for supplementary, and we give them all that we know, all the attention. Still they are not learning. And then we probed a little deeper. We have done everything right. They have been with us from pre-primary, from the emergent literacy stage. Yet, what is wrong? Then we found out, very adverse home situation, broken families, abuse. So I think their brains are damaged in a way, very little can be done. So we are now reconciled कि ये इतना ही सीखेंगे. थोड़ा सा भी पढ़ लिया ना, the child may be in class 5, but reading level is at class 1 or 2, and we are reconciled to that. So this is one kind of situation. But when I keep thinking that, this, I think when you take those numbers of children across India, the bottommost pile, I mean, it's a big number, and there are, so and I am openly talking about where we have not succeeded. So we have not succeeded in doing anything, although we have been trying. And within the school, when we work, there is a limitation of time. In the West Bengal schools, do not work for 100 days even. And even within those 100 days, there are so many events, so many, non-teaching, things happening in a school. So that with the limited time available and with the kind of adverse situations, what is the solution in a country like India, where there is multi-grade, there is multi-language, there is, all these problems are there. And the second set of problem I encountered, and where we more or less did not succeed, is when we worked in Tripura. I was telling Shakti, the trans-languaging that you were talking about, there we had this Kokborok and Bengali. Tripura is ruled by Bengali-speaking people, but a majority of the population speaks Kokborok. Now, Kokborok is a language of Sino-Tibetan origin, which has absolutely no lexical or syntactical, resemblance with, the Indian languages. So it's a complete, and I went to the class, and this is the first time, I have been working in so many states, somehow I managed to communicate. Because Marathi ho, Gujarati ho, there is a similarity. There is a certain structural, and with the use of body language and all, I just failed. There was a completely different language, and to compound the problems, the teacher's appointment is so political. Bengali-speaking teachers have been appointed in those schools. And there is absolute, and how will children learn? And we could not claim that we have succeeded. That is and this is not uncommon. I mean, what I'm quoting an instance, but if you probe deeper, the layers that you discover, and it's really, I'm now thinking, can technology help? I'm just thinking, like, we failed, the amount of time we invested, we could not do much. When I say much, I said that we could not bring the children up to their grade level. I mean, they are struggling readers at all stage. And this Kokborok also, I think, I don't know, with this kind of problem, Dheer would know more because you work in multilingual situations. I mean, when something like this happens, you have only questions and no answers. So I'm sorry about that, Shakti.
Yeah. Thank you, Shubhradi. Please.
This is one point I missed saying, so I really thank you for bringing this up. It is a myth that education can solve all the problems foisted onto schools by society. So we, with our best neuroscience and best curriculum, best pedagogy and best teacher education system, cannot fix all that is systemically wrong in our society. If we have fundamentally an inequitable and completely inequitable, unjust kind of society, we are not going to create equity and justice just through curriculum and pedagogy. And we need to hold the rest of society accountable to do their share. So as you're rightly saying, we cannot fix everything in our schools that society has sort of sent skewed to us. So that's very deeply disturbed. Deeply skewed things. We should be pushing the rest of society for answers. Yeah.
Let me just bring to the table, thank you, Shubhrati. Let me just bring to the table another kind of a complexity. Dheer had mentioned this, which is about the complexity of assessments. And I would want to ask Jayashree ma'am. Yeah. Of assessments. So when we see, I mean, you have been someone who has been a conceptualizer for large-scale assessments. You have advised governments, you have advised fluency benchmarking exercises. We know all of that history. Now, you know, what I want to ask you is, we always see, as Dheer was pointing out, that what gets scaled up is that very simple, quantitative, correct words per minute sort of a thing, which is important. But what about the deeper reading skills, let's say deeper comprehension skills, deeper vocabulary skills? What is your thought on that when it comes to understanding the pulse of children's learning patterns at scale, given the fact that we do not have scalable assessment techniques for those? What is your thought? Like, what would you, or wish list for that matter?
To start with, the wish list would be that we have those abilities to be able to, and that is, I don't know, use of technology, whatever. But more important than technology, how do we think through this, right? Okay. Okay, so I'll come closer. So it's very interesting that you raised this question. Yesterday, actually, one of the teams at CSF, which works on a large scale, you know, like Shuffle, you know, with CBSE's assessment and what do we do and all that. And my first response to that was that the kind of learning that we would like to have, it's not possible to assess in the kind of, even if you're talking about assessment which is supposed to be no pressure on children, it's supposed to just gauge and help the schools to get feedback so that the schools can do something. That's a bigger thought, right? So we're not even talking about, we're talking about accountability. Here we are talking about how do we help the system to learn. Even then, we do not have the methodologies to do it. My thought would be, and truly even a wish, though which is very well known, everybody believes in it, but not being implemented. And that is to say, do we have, and I do believe that at different stages, are we able to, I don't even want to call it assess the children, but be able to scaffold their learning by raising kind of questions which help them think through, right? So, I mean, part of my explanation would be, when you are teaching, are you asking them to think through something, but it's still a challenge for them initially, right? So I'll give you a simple example which comes to my mind. You didn't raise these questions to me. Shailaja and Dheer were lucky that you had given them the questions. You didn't create questions to us. But I'll give you a simple, to me would be something like, if I want to, if as a teacher, if I'm teaching a theorem, like I want to say that sum total of the three angles is going to be 180 degrees. I can say that, but I don't want teachers to say that, right? What I would ideally like is ask students to draw number of 2, 3, triangles, every child, let's say 30 students. So you got like a huge number of triangles sitting there. I'm going to ask them to measure it and then be able to say, okay, what is the total, etc. Now, when you ask about assessment, is this an assessment? I'm not going to give them marks or anything. I want them to teach and understand a concept. So when they say, well, most of them would say 180 degrees, some may make mistake and not say that, right? Then I'm going to say, okay, would you want to try it? You want your friend to help you, etc. And then ultimately to be able to say, okay, all of you got this. Do you think next door if I did it, will it work? Will it be the same? Will it be 180 degrees? They'll probably say yes. Will it be true in another part of the country? They'll say yes. So I think assessment can be used in a variety of manner, right? Now, having done that is helping them to develop this, or understand this, which is already an established fact, right? But I want them to discover it. After that, maybe I would give them a test in terms of to say, I want you to draw next lesson, 2 types of triangles, and the check for you would be, they already know the check. To say, is my triangle the correct triangle or have I drawn something else? So they will again examine it. So for me, assessment must be used to further learning at all times, including now coming to large scale assessments, to say it is for the system. Right? Is the system learning something out of it? Unfortunately, my limited experience would say that very often large scale assessments get done, we have the report, nobody looks at the findings in terms of how do we utilize it to say what are the patterns emerging at a state level, at a district level, to say these are the 2 or 3 concepts, because your ideal assessment should have number of questions for the same concept, and you can triangulate and to be able to find that. If you're asking about, and one of the big challenge, so I don't want to get into assessment so much, one of the big challenge, and I think what Dheer and Shailaja both alluded to, is do we understand the contextual reality of the children? Are we creating not only our pedagogy but even our assessments which speak to their context, right? So if you, very strange things if you're asking those students who are exposed in an urban area to, let's say, an escalator, and you're asking a question around that, children in the remote area, never seen it, will never, so there is not even the assessment is not about the actual question, the assessment also is about that hurdle to learning, right? Because that hurdle is not having that contextual experience at all. So I think a lot of our assessments suffer from contextual understanding of the children, and how can we ensure that that is inbuilt in the type of questions that we're asking. So to me,
Jayashree, one point to that. I mean, I think the biggest debate that happens in my head is also about, like, when we start harboring the local context of the child, the contextual information of the child into an assessment pattern, does that become scalable? Because I think this is where, because we need certain solutions at scale.
Also, I think first question one has to ask is, what are the different purposes of assessment, right? If our purpose in the classroom or at the school level or at the local area is to have the children got enough breadth of learning, then I would say keep it contextual there, right? Your large-scale assessment, if you have very limited purpose of saying, okay, there are at a top level, these are the 5 learning outcomes, we want to see whether they achieved that or not, it's a very different thing. But if you're asking that, are they thinking deeply about the story they have read, or have they made their own conclusion of what should be the ending of the story? Just very simple examples I'll give you. I think it's very hard to be able to, at the moment at least. My hope is that with the help of AI and also using tech, we are able to give different kinds of opportunities to children to be able to explore their own answers, their own thinking, etc. So I do not believe that in today's context that we have those answers to say, can that be scalable? I mean, you think of the example that Carson gave. Okay? I do not believe that we even understand, or the examples in terms of, I think someone was sharing in terms of in the presentation, that the sounds which are different itself, how are you going to assess that? And therefore, I think staying with a limited purpose at the moment for a large-scale assessment, that can we find some patterns, why, and can we change the materials or teacher trainings accordingly, then stay with that purpose. But ensure that in the classroom, while teaching, immediately after teaching, so think of assessment in a variety of manner and its variety of purposes, rather than thinking, well, one assessment solve all the purposes. At the moment, my personal belief, I don't think so.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayashree.
Can I just make a point here? This is just like a food for thought, I think, given what Jayashree ma'am said. I think assessments, and when we say that we want to have a evidence-based decision making. As a group, as a consortium, how do we kind of advocate to see that this evidence-based decision making is not political in nature, but it's actually used for learning? And how do we make decisions and utilize these assessments for learning? So I think this is where we as a group would have to come together and really think through this. We may not have answers today, but it's very important that we notify this and advocate in all our conversations to use those assessments for decision making, not for political purposes, but for the students' learning outcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Jayashree ma'am. Can I come to you, Gayatri? So a very similar question. Like, what do you do with this dilemma about what can be done at scale and what needs to be done in depth? And in terms of creating actual test items.
Right.
So, and anything you want to talk about.
Yeah, so I think many of the problems that we've discussed are very real problems, whether it is assessments or classroom practices. I was in Tripura last week, so I completely empathize with what you've experienced. We are struggling to create an assessment in Cockburrock there because there are children who just haven't been taught because of the absence of the teacher, so completely empathize with that. Coming back to the question, I think a couple of things. If I just look at the assessment tool as the first thing, one, of course, I agree that each assessment has a certain objective, and mainly large-scale assessments that we do are generally to inform the systems, both in terms of the current learning levels and the existing gaps. But still, when you design the tool, and because we are talking about scalability and language is a lot of context, and at times we also create these tools across languages, I think what we generally try to do and recommend is also doing something called as harmonization, where depending on each question's purpose also, if we can align, then even if there is a contextualization for that region, that tool, you can sort of make room for it, going by the complexity of orthography, the familiarity of the object and stuff like that. So that's something that can, to an extent, solve the tool contextualization problem. That's one thing. I think the challenges that I face, and maybe also just the approach that we take, like assessments should inform systems and classroom practices, but should not drive them. And when I say this, the challenge that we've been observing is when these numbers come out, and if you just look at these numbers as numbers, then the immediate reaction of any intervention, be it state-driven or otherwise, is to fix those numbers. And moment we take that approach, what starts happening is maybe in short term, because our strategies within the intervention can focus on those approaches, the results may change. I don't know if the learning is changing. And we have two different examples, one from the FLN space and one from non-FLN space, where in both cases when the critical thinking skills, whichever that was, be it reading comprehension or operations, were identified to be very low, those particular interventions focus so much on reading or on operations that those critical thinking skills appear to be growing very fast. But if you go and check the letter naming ability, their ability to identify sounds, that was still very basic. So I think deciding on post-assessment approach and how the data is also utilized becomes extremely crucial. And rather than focusing on numbers, I think also going back to Purnima's question there, every assessment should bring out both short-term strategies and long-term strategies. I think long-term strategies will have to focus on education. Short-term can be some fixes in the intervention that we may need to drive. So I think that's my take on this.
Thank you. Anybody's points? Am I missing anybody's? Yes, please.
Can I add to this? Not to this particularly, but only on assessment, and as we also hear the word, typically assessment appears to be of the learner, but assessment is of a learning process, assessment is of what happened. And I need only the learning level data all the time to make decision. There is other data point that I may need to make those changes and shift. I think somewhere in the assessment, and theoretically and technically, I never read that assessment is of only the learner, but somewhere as we're talking of a science of a reading, are we also being very narrowed in that? Because probably we also need a different evidences to make even the short term and the long term strategy. Just placing that point here as we grapple with all of other things.
Thank you. Before I go to some more specific questions for some of our friends here, I just want to raise one point here, which is for everybody. Please, all of you can respond. I think this is my feeling that we really need some clarity of thought and clarity for action when it comes to something like a fluency benchmarking exercise. This gets so intertwined with our assessment practices, with what needs to be done inside the classroom after the assessment is done. All of this get decided. There's something like a fluency benchmarking exercise behind all of this. As Room to Read, we have been one of the first people who wanted to do fluency benchmarking and understand the role of fluency in comprehension and reading processes. That research is available. Once again, from a scientific lens or from a scientific approach, that has been debated. Alternative ways have been proposed in various other countries. There is a research on South Africa and some of those 6 languages that we do. We can see that things are unfolding. But what we see in India is that the moment the fluency benchmarking is done for a certain language, it immediately transfers itself as a project goal. And somewhere probably we forget that, it's a very good number to hold on to. It's very easy to hold on to. But somewhere we need to understand that the fluency benchmarking is for the language and not for children. And children may take various time periods to be able to reach that fluency benchmark. And even that benchmark also needs to be seen in the context of a larger comprehension. So all of this put together, there is enough complexity in this whole process. But when it gets translated to our world of action, it seems like those 30 correct words per minute is what you need to fight tooth and nail for. And I have seen where we have made interim goals like 16 words per minute पहले chunk पे, उसके बाद 20 कर देंगे, उसके बाद अच्छा 25 हो गया. I know how this sort of a thing is also important for a project health analysis, that how many children are where. But taking these as learning outcomes or learning milestones also creates confusions. I think we need clarity. I just need your thoughts on this. I mean, please say that my thoughts are completely wrong if you want to, but here is my submission, and I want you all to critique it. Yes.
So, Shakti, I don't have a direct answer for your question, but I do have. I was very curious. Why, as this community, are we so interested behind the science of reading? Is it that the inquisitiveness or an inquiry, is what is driving us towards it? Or, or the intent is probably to have much more of a quick fix, scalable solution, which can be driven to the policy? Or is it something so fundamental which would go into building the agency or the autonomy of the teacher per se? There could be multiple facets to the curiosity behind. Why do we really want to get into the formula of, what would really work? So, unfortunately or fortunately, haven't read so many theories. So whatever I have experienced is just being a practitioner for the past 2 decades. So what I've seen, that's for someone who even doesn't know the theory, might be like what Shelja was putting forward, that theoretically or through the research 20 years before or 20 years behind, what America is. But what I do see, if we see in a very commonsensical way of what's happening in the classroom, and if you're going to really understand that what is really propelling a child to read or not to read, I understand 2-3 factors here. One, I really understand that, what we bring in as a country is the diversity of languages, and the diversity of language in terms of formulating norms like your fluency norm, or it could even be the time duration which we would want to give for a child to move from, say, one milestone to the other. There is a huge influencing factor which needs to be actually understood. And in this place, what I have always seen is the medium of instruction, the language which could be the language of my, comfort as a learner, and the exposure of the ecosystem which I'm part of. All three does play a bigger role in terms of my language ability as well as my literacy acquisition. But most of the policies which do have a very binary approach in terms of medium instruction, in terms of mother tongue. But in a multilingual society like us, it's more of a linguistic ecosystem that plays a broader role around how much of acquisition is practically possible for a child. And I am not very sure that is that taken into building agency of the teacher. Because it's the teacher who would be able to do the buffering and the scaffolding here. And it is those assessments which a teacher want to make to build those bridges are much more useful. If we imagine it to be a very centralized intervention of us being able to gauge it and having policy, curriculum, and ABC done around it, probably I think that's where probably we are doing a bit of injustice to our children. Because, I do understand this is a bigger intellectual pursuit, but is that going to be a very centralized of some people who would be giving solutions, or this is just a thought or a vision which we want every teacher to understand so that she is able to figure it out? Because I don't see, we see them more as implementers, or we see them more of, we've done the textbook, we've done the curriculums, you're going to just execute it. But other than that, in terms of giving that autonomy even to the teacher to understand that in your ecosystem of your children with so many multiple languages and diversity, what is the role you would be playing? I have really not seen too many interventions working around it. So science of reading, I do see, is useful if that science is something which is going to be one more perspective building for a teacher to understand and localize and customize to her situation, rather than any of us who are sitting here to probably come up with वो क्या बोलते हैं कि एक ढासू solution, because I don't think it's going to work that way, is what is my limited understanding on the issue.
Agree, Gayatri. But let me also say, why are we talking about the science of reading here as a community? Well, I can just tell you what I feel. I will not be able to speak on behalf of the entire community. But, I just love the idea of a science of reading and the scientific gaze at reading with all the answers that it gives, and more because of the answers that it doesn't give. Because it leaves a lot of space for further scientific inquiry. So I love holding on to it. So, and I do not look at it as the only Dhasu solution, which will never happen. ऐसे होता नहीं है, because the complexity of implementation is itself a complexity and a technicality in its own right. And only a scientific gaze at reading or a technical gaze at something will be able to solve all problems if we even think that we are being oversimplistic. That doesn't happen. So, as I said, why are we all here and why we wanted to have everybody's views on something like the science of reading? The science of reading for me is most symptomatic. What I need to ask myself and what I want you all to reflect along with us is that what is that, as I said earlier, what is that larger conceptual framework that we are all thinking as practitioners? This is our knowledge. and we probably need to be very, very conscious about our knowledge base as well. Even when we say that this is something that we do not completely, believe in, or something that, I would want to have an alternative view, that's a wonderful way of dealing with debates within the knowledge space. So that's why, it is not about a Dhasu solution here. It is about how do we think as practitioners when we all come together. Let's just separate out a day and think about it. Yes, Dev, please.
I think an extension of what you... Sorry.
One small, probably. What I was trying to put forward, Shaktida, is very basic. What I'm saying is... sorry, should I use the mic? The science of reading, it's a beautiful intellectual pursuit. The generalization which has come out of it is beautiful. Considering if it has been inductively done from the ground as a part of an action research process, because it's a very simple inductive patterning which is clearly visible. Someone has done somewhere has also probably used the similar approach. But what is currently happening is we are more downloading whatever the frames that has been created in terms of understanding those frames at the ground level, and giving very less opportunity to inductively understand what's happening in our context, in our classrooms, with our teachers in terms of barriers, and how do they per se understand the culture, context, language, literacy, and children play. The fear is just that, because with 20 years of lot of pumping of resources in terms of validating those frames in our grassroots systems, we are probably losing out a beautiful opportunity of empowering our own people to inductively formulate their framework. It's just that. That science, I think if we have that opportunity there, might be we do a little bit of
just want to
to
respond
this.
Yes,
please.
I think you make a very, very important point, and I would say to go forward from your point would be to actually have more research into the very diversified contexts that we have and what seems to work or doesn't work in different contexts. Not to say that a scientific gaze is not important, but to say that it's not universal what's coming out of some other context. But we still need to study what, let's say, teachers are doing, what seems to work or not. These could be solutions which have been worked out at a somewhat macro level or even by individual teachers. But there is a need to study that, right? And a need to study that to be able to provide evidence. I think that's the thing.
Give us autonomy to be the researchers.
So that's one. But again, research methods and ensure that that evidence counts. That's very important. It's possible to say, we have action research, we have all kinds of research but research that will be taken note of by others, so that it helps to do it elsewhere also, where context could be similar. Let's not assume that every school is a different context. That's taking it too far. But it is important, therefore, to have a scientific way of looking at what's working with a design, which could then help others. It's not, I don't think the case is to do exactly what has been said elsewhere and replicate it, but do it, do this kind of research in more locations would be more useful.
Thank you.
I know I'm not directly answering either you or you, but I was just thinking that when we say science of reading, when you say I see value, when you say scientific, I think that we are using the word scientific in slightly different ways. Yeah? So for my purpose, to just clarify to myself, instead of saying, I'm going to call the simple science of reading, which is embedded in the sciences of reading, or the social science of reading.
Mm-hmm.
So when Dheer, you, etc. are saying scientific, I'm assuming you mean this broader knowledge basis, which include non-quasi-experimental and experimental.
Yes.
So I'm just trying to make sure that we understand that we are not referring only to the evidence base coming from the simple science of reading.
Absolutely. So non-experimental, non-neuroscience necessarily, but also a lot of our effort right now is on program evaluation. And that's a challenge. Because program evaluation just tells us something in this program worked and children learnt more. I'm just saying that the inquiry should be more focused about teaching and learning processes. Why did children learn? A lot of our so-called experimental difference in difference and other approaches right now are focused on evaluations broadly, but they don't get to why and what is therefore important in the classroom. I think that shift is also important.
Let me turn towards Anushtup. And there is a lot of context that is already placed for you. You can straight away give us your perspectives. That's number one. That's one way of doing it. The other thing is, if there is a specific question that I want to frame for you, it could also be something like, my kind of a summary of what needs to be addressed is that, yes, we agree to the fact that there is a need of a scalable solution which can be measured, which has some sort of a scientific inquiry, scientific basis. Even, as I said, personally, I would also want to look at the science of reading perspective also, along with many others, to be able to understand my larger sense of inquiry in understanding what can be scaled up. Whereas there is a need that is pulling us about diversities, contexts, complexities, and in many of these large-scale programs across the world, you can look at the entire spectrum of research across other countries. This somewhere doesn't get addressed too well. What is your... So the idea of a context, idea of diversities, complexities of a school system, complexities of a linguistic system, they often do not get addressed that well in many of the researches that advocate scale and impact at scale and things like that. What is your thought on that?
So first, I must admit that I'm quite scared to be in a room like this, because this is not a subject on which I forget being an expert. It's just 3-4 years ago I started learning, and from the very people who are sitting on this table. So being able to make comments in a more substantive manner, of course, is but here is my learning, and where I like to and the lens from which I look at it is that of an implementer, right? I take a lot of and a lot of my learning has actually come from Dheer, from you, from Shailaja, and from Subhradi and Jayashree, of course, and a bunch of others. I think context is important, but context becomes oftentimes a hiding place to stymie to come to a common ground. We often, I find myself very troubled in rooms like this when you're trying to come to a consensus of something that works, and then you throw the word. I mean, I used to, Partha is one of my colleagues, if you want to stop any discussion and derail it, just throw the word MGML and context. And you can be rest assured after that, koi discussion nahi ho paega. And of course, Karsten and MLE, right? If you throw MLE, context and MGML, after that, no. Of course, context is important, but there is, at least having listened to all of you and having worked with some of you for the last 3-4 years, I think there are certain things I think most of us agree on. I think there is far more agreement around here. Where I struggle is that who's we? And I'll tell you a quick story. I was in MP with, I think Shaktida was there, and perhaps some of the other colleagues from Room to Read, and we know a very important stakeholder whom we always work with. And for 1 hour, we were discussing the usual कि वर्ना समूह approach क्यों नहीं implement किया जाता है. बहुत discussion हुआ, and I was just a fly on the wall and all that. फिर lunch break हुआ, and थोड़ा सब लोग ठंडा हो गए, and ये वो सौरभ भी थे. So anyway, I was sitting next to this gentleman. I said, sir, इतने दिन से मैं ये मीटिंग्स में आ रहा हूँ, क्या ये वर्ण समूह अप्रोच इतना खराब है या क्या, मतलब आपको क्या लगता है ये दिस इज समथिंग दैट यू डोंट रियली वांट, आई मीन क्या है? He said नहीं, मैं तो बहुत इसका, I really think it is a good approach. So I was a little taken aback. I said but ये क्यों चल रहा है ये, मैंने I just took him aside, but I said ये क्यों चल रहा है? He said मैं तो बोल रहा हूँ रूम टू रीड के साथ 3.5 साल से यही मुद्दा पे डिस्कशन हो रहा है. Then he said नहीं ये आप और ये रूम टू रीड CSF वाले जब आते हो ना, ये सब अच्छा आइडिया लेके आते हो, बट पूरी सोल्यूशन नहीं लाते हो कि इसको लाने के बाद मेरे लाइफ में क्या चेंज होगा. मेरे लाइफ में टेक्स्ट बुक चेंज होगा, मैं ये सारे टीचरों को फिर से ट्रेन करूँगा, मुझे और 7 लोगों को समझाना होगा कि ये क्यों सही है. आप ये सब CSF, रूम टू रीड, ये सब केयर नहीं करते हो. दैट इज़ वाई आई अपोज यू. मेरा आपके साथ कोई दुश्मनी नहीं है. मैंने सोचा सर हमने कुछ गलती किया होगा. And why I'm telling you this story, that was a moment of truth for me, that oftentimes in our fervor of advocating something that we consider as truth, it is actually colliding with 2 things. One is a learnt behavior, and especially Shailaja referred to is that teachers cannot be trained, they have to be educated. But it's underneath that education is also the learning of a teacher. So I think we are confronting with a lot of learnt behaviors and belief systems that we are not fully understanding and addressing and negotiating. तो हम लोग अभी तो एक रूम में बैठेंगे, I think जितना भी हम एक दूसरे के साथ लड़ेंगे 80% तो I am sure we will agree on. I mean I'm just saying. And मैंने आप लोगों से सुना हुआ है, I have also learned that आप लोग जितना भी we will debate each other. But I think this is under emphasized, this tool of how do we pursue it. And I used to be a salesman in my previous job as an entrepreneur. And I used to think that was the worst job I had until I actually realized that it taught me. No, I mean that's, when I came back to India and the first thing I had to do was to make this organization work, and I had to go and sell this program in Tamil Nadu to schools, and I used to feel, oh, this is the most degrading job. But I think in doing that I learned a lot, that one thing sales teaches you is to understand that the other person's worldview is very different from yours. And even if you are so passionate about your worldview, unless you negotiate that, you can't do anything. So I think we need to think harder about जो चीज़ें हम 8-10 साल से जानते हैं और जो चीज़ें होना चाहिए. मैं ये वर्ण समूह की बात कर रहा हूँ. मैं कीर्ति मैम से मिला था, I think around the same time when I joined CSF, धीर. Then I was like, oh yeah, सब लोग वर्ण समूह के बारे में बात करते. So I went and asked अखिला. मैं बोला कि इसको थोड़ा मुझे संक्षिप्त में समझा दो. And of course she taught and Akhila is a colleague who now works with Shailaja. So I was like, then why is it not spread like wildfire? If this is something that everybody seems to agree on, everybody seems to think this is the right way to teach children, I think we need to work harder on that. That how do we negotiate that with others who are not part of a room like this? And I think we are not making enough progress there. I mean, that's just one thing I wanted to put forward, and that includes government officials, that includes teachers, that includes everyone else who needs to be enrolled as part of this movement. Of the 80% of things we agree on, 20% of things, of course, as everyone has stated, we need to work on further. I would slightly not disagree, but on the experiments here, one of the problems we find is there isn't enough replication research. If you look at it, my peeve with the neuroscientists is not that their theories are incomplete, or even my peeve with like the economist types is that they don't answer the why. But I would say that when we go searching for studies based out of India, जब मैं जाता हूँ कोई भी की quote करने, right? What do I have to quote eventually? I'll say, I mean, यही लोग बैठे हुए, so I'll take your names. I will say room to read in Uttarakhand and Barwani. I will say care in Odisha. Now LLF results are coming out, and Liril ho gaye mere, I have counted this on my fingers, and many studies on Pratham. But there is not enough replication of these things in India, and only then we will understand कि context कितना role play करता है, and which of these theories are also independent of context. So I would still not give up that this science, and I'm talking to you, ma'am, sorry I didn't get your names.
Gayatri.
Gayatri. I still feel that we do need replication of some studies to stand on some terra firma even in the Indian context. So that's my second point. And Shaktida, I want to also refer to your point around things like ORF. Now, I think sometimes what happens is that when you put a measure and you put a little bit of force behind it, it becomes a target, which is a wrong thing. The second thing is you become married to the measure, and I'll put it because CSF has been now, I mean, I'll be very honest, because CSF had put a little bit of force around ORF. But I want to help you understand where actually we stand on, and we have learned from all of you. And I am very close to what Dheer showed in that study, that when the ultimate goal of literacy, I agree, it is not reading. I think the Western, it is reading and writing, and as a parent of a dysgraphic child, I'm very, very passionate about writing, and I've recently discovered more about writing in trying to teach my child, but leave that. But I think we need to understand that comprehension is the ultimate target. But we need to also figure out a way to know whether we are going in the right direction or not. And is ORF a good predictor? I think all studies show it's a good predictor. But as Dheer very nicely pointed out, that once you reach higher levels of fluency, it doesn't become a good predictor. But if you have like I think, let's say, I don't know, 10, I mean, we have been dealing with this, you know, a child has 10 or 15 oral reading fluency, I think it needs intervention, and I think that's where I would put it. And we should do more studies to figure out. We've done some regressions. I don't want to take too much time to see at what threshold of ORF does the comprehension level actually then take over and all of that. So I think we, instead of defending these measures and saying that okay, either I'm for it or against it, then what is the predictor for ORF? And like, I think the very healthy debate that was happening with Gayatri so that's the one point. The other point I just wanted to mention is this problem with assessment is that it doesn't, the AII, the assessments link with instruction is very, very weak. And that's what I have learned most from working with LLF and room to read programs, which have a very good AII component, and I'm probably far more familiar with the LLF program a little bit more because I've been working with that program longer. That how do we, of the things that we know how to measure, of the things that the teacher can measure herself easily in their classroom without much training, can we give the teacher the so what tools? I think that is going to make a very big difference, and that's not emphasized well within our system. Of course, we get carried away by ye assessment hona chahiye ki nahi, ye complete hai ki nahi. I don't think that, at least from I put on an implementation lens, I think of myself as a engineer manager of this enterprise. I'm not a scientist, I'm not an artist, but as an engineer manager, I think the loop for the teacher is never complete. So बहुत सारा assessments हो रहे हैं, और सारे assessment हो रहे हैं which is to help my boss. मतलब teacher is doing assessment so that ARP या जो CRC है उसको वो खुश हो जाए, वो असेसमेंट कर रहे हैं क्योंकि उसके ऊपर के लोग खुश हो जाए. But I think can all of us look at a few simple classroom based assessments, and they're all in your programs. It's not that. So those are my summary thoughts.
Thank you. Thank you. So Vijay Tyagarajan is from the British Council, and we would really want to hear your perspectives on this idea of science of reading when you're dealing with multiple languages and English juxtaposed with each other. Some thoughts, please.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. So I'm neither a subject matter expert in this group nor a practitioner, but yes, to a certain extent an implementer. I wanted to just comment on your question as well as one more point about assessments. Yeah. So with my hat of having handled assessments in British Council, we delivered the English language exams to school children as well as adults. And the interesting find which we came about was, while we were testing all the 4 skills, reading was actually on the higher side for children in schools. They scored really well there. Now, yes, I'm not talking about government school children, but I'm talking about children from our metrics and our CBSE, school, and their English levels in terms of reading was good, which means there's something right which is going on there, which might be a food for thought, for people like you all who are kind of implementing it at government programs, while it was completely opposite when it was at the adults. So there's something wrong in the science of reading which is going wrong between these intervention phases. That was the kind of, we had evidences which showed that in schools children were scoring higher in the reading skills, while when they were entering for the 4 skills for the IELTS and going abroad, reading was really lacking. The reading skill score was pretty pathetic. So there's something over there which might be a food for thought. It depends on, of course, the demographics, because writing was very good in the south, and so there was a it was a very interesting demographics. But the thing here was about reading, which I wanted to say. Coming to his question about how we are handling the science of reading in terms of the multiple learners, and also I can there might be a little disability in what I'm saying, because I wouldn't look at it from the multilingual hat at all. We are right now coming up with that idea, but it is more about English. But I can see a big change when 10 years ago, when I was into libraries, 10 to 15 years ago, the complete concept of even reading inside the library, there was a big uptake. There were a lot of children who were coming beyond their school hours to come read books, but then there was a sense of competition also was high. It was always you hold a kind of a reading challenge or a reading marathon program. It was always, what is my child going to get out of it? A certificate of participation was never enough. You need to grade them. You need to say that my child has, that was the context 10 years back. Whereas now I can see a big difference in that, when we run our reading challenges and reading marathon, it's more open in terms of children's participation, and I feel that there's a lot of, now the creativity bit of it is really coming out, and so there's something right going on in school education, is my perspective of it. Whereas in India, definitely, because I'm handling more countries. There's India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Myanmar under my, in terms of physical spaces where I deal with children in the physical spaces. India is definitely top of the lot in terms of number of children participating, the number of engagement we have. Now we are also reaching out to government schools. I know there is an intervention from your end, but what we try to do is bring a fresh perspective over there in terms of reading for the children by interspersing it with the activities. And what is the difference I noticed is, children who come into British Council libraries, the level which they are at, if they are at an kind of upper intermediate, I take the same program for children at the same level, but at a lower intermediate, and it works wonders. And the intervention when we have with teachers in between, when there is a reading marathon or a reading kind of challenge program which happens, the children really look forward to those intervention session about, how do you kind of work around writing a book review. It might be very simple, but what is very important is the visualization. And when there is a storytelling which happens, we have done it digitally and it has worked really well, where we had a storyteller kind of enact the performance. And just one person, it was solo, but it made a huge difference. So I think that's what we need to also inculcate into our teachers, that they might have to be a little bit of a performer when they are, at the junior level. So that's the thing I see. But then creativity is the same, whichever level the child is, whether they are from a government school or from a school where everything is available to them. It's just the levels we need to be considerate about when they are handling them. That's my kind of take on it.
Thank you.
And 5 minutes,
I mean, I have a few questions for the rest of the people. One specific question for Amrita, and then I think we need about 10 minutes of discussions, if at all.
Is everyone okay extending it for some more time? Thank you. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah, okay. Chandni, over to you. And your colleague, I am forgetting her name. Shrutika. Yeah. Yes. So we have been seeing that you guys have been putting forward some thoughts on, the technicalities of implementation and what literacy gets into in a different shape when it comes to large-scale implementation. So some thoughts on that. Just give us your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much.
I mean, your colleague can join in whenever she wants.
Shrutika, please jump in. I think Shrutika is in schools every day, so she'll have a lot of lens from, daily what is happening, especially in Uttarakhand. I think I was resonating a lot, Anustup, when you were speaking. We have similar kind of work areas in terms of practitioner and working with the government. I think one or two of the learnings that we've really had is that balance between, like, one is the technicalities piece, but honestly, more than what we are learning about technicalities, I think when it comes to implementation, we're learning that actually the game changer in things is investment of the stakeholders. So you can know everything you know about the technicalities. I can bring this entire group of highly esteemed people in front of the government, but agar हम उनकी language में उनसे बात नहीं कर रहे तो बात नहीं बनेगी. So really knowing, and like more than, I think as a practitioner, knowing the science, the technicalities of reading, but I would say just human psychology is very necessary. And also when we work with stakeholders, understanding that there's a critical balance or a dance we need to dance honestly, which is, okay, what is the stakeholder or political will? Because the truth of it, and so many of us resonated with it, ki they will want performance benchmarks. They will say कि ये campaign चल रहा है या नहीं चल रहा है, ये project चल रहा है या नहीं चल रहा है. That is going to be a kind of the prerogative or the goal of a state body or a government. And the teacher needs will be highly, highly different. The needs, I'm saying, of the teacher will be highly different from that. And what is your role as a practitioner also when you're bringing in that knowledge to balance those two things out, to be able to speak to the political will, still move the needle. I would say, I would call them gentle nudges. Just gently nudge in a direction that is more in service of the classroom. At the same time, like responding to the stakeholder who is the decision maker at the government level. So definitely, like I would say that one thing we've learned in the technicalities, technical support that we give any government body is definitely when we go with, they call us knowledge partners. They call us knowledge partners for a reason. Most of us have partnerships if we have with the government, we're called knowledge partners. In that, inherent in that is that the fact that they trust you to know the knowledge. What they want from you is how do you operationalize it really? Like how batao कि आप teacher education program, आप उनका professional development कैसे करोगे, ये ground पे कैसे चलेगा, कितने महीने चलेंगे, कितना time लगेगा. That's really what they want to know. And it is a responsibility, I would call, of the knowledge partner to bring that in, to really get the investment of the government into it. I think the balance and what we've learned from us is whatever we have learned in our schools and whatever science or technical understanding we're developing, we always come with, we've tried it, tested it in our schools first. We know key teachers are bought into it, it's working for children, and usually 90% of our tools are co-designed with teachers either from Uttarakhand, Punjab or Delhi, the context that we work in. So the stories, like everything is a representation that the teachers have written themselves. So I think that also really accelerates the buy-in also from both the teachers and the stakeholder. Another element I would add, so one is just how do you get that investment, and the investment does come from really outlining the what as well as the how of the program. Why usually they are already sold on. You don't really need to, like, in my experience, itna convincing on like why it's required, how, like there is a inherent trust there which I must give credit to the government on. There is a trust ki haan ye bachcho ke liye acha hoga. So that I would say is at a state stakeholder level. There is a further responsibility, I think, and Shrutika you can speak to this, is how do we always bring the teacher's voice. So I'll give a small example of this. Agar hum ek teacher education program or something we're working on with the government, we're doing some kind of training or any kind of workshop, one is definitely advocating for whatever the government campaign or the program might be. But at the same time, can you dedicate a day to what does assessment look like every day in the teacher's classroom? So this national FLN mission or state FLN program might be running. And usually what we've seen in the trainings, what happens is that it is that, oh, you know, there's this training or there's a program running in the state. Now you must do this assessment, you must use this workbook, and you must do this. It's very much a, like as Shelja said, like it's that like training a dog kind of thing. You must do this, you must do that. Yeah. Even in that, our gentle nudge, I would say, is can you add a day saying that yes, this is the program, but how would maybe everyday FLN instruction look like in your classroom, and what assessments would be meaningful for you? Just add that. We're not saying take away, just add that. Right. And how do you do that, and how do you bring that together? And really redesign programs. What we have learned is from the redesign any kind of teacher development program with like probably teachers co-facilitating that with us, or bringing their best practices and perspectives into the conversation. I think that's been evident, like that's been actually what has created success in probably higher adoption of things happening. So one, to summarize quickly, I know I'm taking a lot of time here, but one is having a practice or like I would say maybe an action research evidence base that this is working. Whatever this technical workbook or technical training that we're proposing, it is working. Teachers have co-designed it. It's working आपके context में कर रहा है और in स्कूलों में, and we usually also invite people for a visit into the schools as well. It's important to bring state officials into schools. So designing from that lens, carrying that body of evidence, ensuring that we're also having conversations about operationalizing programs meaningfully. And then even when it comes to the dissemination pieces of it, ensuring that teacher voice and teacher relevance is there. And I mean, your job as a practitioner for me is to balance both. Like take care, obviously you have to respond to the political will, but you are also in service of the teacher and the classroom, and it's your role to kind of bridge those two worlds as well. Yeah, I mean, if Shrutika wants to add, I'm sorry for the time was a bit over. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Chandni. I'll probably bring in the little bit of, say the...
Short, please.
Yeah. Yes, the school level perspective over here. So Chandni already spoke about the investment bit where like the one core principle is how do we really co-design, right? Even if we are taking, say, like a teacher practice, is it something we are saying that, hey, okay, it is a practice, these are the steps to do it, I'm going to show you how to do it, so do it from now onwards? Or is it really about that, hey, okay, like I'm going to show you today, I need feedback from you. What do you think? Do you saw it working in your classroom or not? And how would you adapt to it? So really sort of whenever we think of even like scaling a practice, is the teacher's voice, is their experience is incorporated that or not? And then
what happens in that process is that it's not us who's saying that, okay, this works, but teachers who are doing it every day, they become advocates for those solutions. So it's not only us as individuals or as an organizations doing it, but actually teachers also saying it. And the other critical thing has been around just the, something that I think Dheer also touched upon is around the safety in the learning environment, right? How do we really bring that for us to get to the language? And over there, we've seen the mother tongue approach really, you know, like sort of taking that in building that literacy, where again, it doesn't become about reading, but rather literacy, that, hey, how many conversations and interactions with the child happening about their household in the language that they are most comfortable in, before we really say that, okay, like we need to learn one standardized language here. So, you know, like really sort of bringing in that mother tongue aspect and starting with that and building on that, which also creates that comfort and safety for the child. And to be able to do this, not only sort of working with teachers on the practice level, but also the mindset level, right? What are the current beliefs and biases that I hold as someone who's going into the classroom, that teacher holds, that the parents are holding towards the language, because there's also that set hierarchy of language, right? Given we have been colonized, and you know, like that thing is there, those hierarchies are there. So how are we sort of really bringing in the check on our existing biases and mindsets, along with really focusing on the practice, and how do we do the work together rather than saying, okay, I'm going to just do practice for that will change the mindset, or just the mindset that will change the practice, but how both the things are sort of really, you know, happening together. Yeah, and really just like going back to the principle of really bringing teachers into the whole process, and their experiences also being valued in the design processes as well, and not only the knowledges that we hold.
Thank you. Samyukta, can we come to you? So, we know about Pratham's work in literacy, and we know about Pratham's work in the larger expanse of that age group from ages 3 to 8. So when you look at that larger early learning portfolio of yours, there is a very strong early learning component which is dealing with age groups, let's say 5 to 6, just before standard 1. I would want to know a little more about your experiences, very focused on emergent literacy and literacy in standard 1. What are you trying to look at as a conceptual framework and a practice framework when it comes to merging emergent literacy and the formal school-based literacy together? Given the context that the word that gets used in the government parlance today is school readiness. Over to you. And your colleague Draupadi may please also join.
Yeah, Draupadi can add, but I just have to say, as I was listening to everyone, it's been a joy listening to everyone, and different conversations through different states and different years were flashing through my mind. So I feel like in terms of the fact that we're having this conversation, I think we've come a long way, and the government has also come a long way. I remember a time when people would say, what do you mean bachcho ko padhna nahi aata? You know, now today no one's saying that. Everyone's saying, batao yaar kya karna hai? Okay, which is a great place to be. In my interaction with the WCD, one of the departments, WCD in one state, when I said कि बच्चों के लिए किताब चाहिए, they said why? बच्चे तो पढ़ नहीं सकते, छोटे बच्चे हैं. And then I said नहीं, but चाहिए, because print rich material होना चाहिए. This, that, अपना पूरा ज्ञान दे दिया मैंने. And they said वो सब तो ठीक है, but we don't have norms to print. We only have norms to purchase play material. Okay, that's where they were, and maybe many departments even today are there. Okay, so I think the fact, I mean, with the contribution of the policy world, so many documents out there, so much discussion around it, whatever little evidence research is out there, I think if we look at the last 20 years or 30 years, I feel the needle has shifted with the conversations about how we're not questioning reading, we're talking about the science of reading. You know, we are saying, do I agree with your approach versus mine? And so in that sense, macro, when I see, I think things have moved there, that everyone is talking about this. And I think the part that's, while this is really good, the part that one gets worried about and often frustrated about is that you know, we've just about understood that it's important to learn to read, but we want to show impact. Okay, so now how do we show impact? We need to have something that can quickly be used across the country, because it's not about the teacher in the class, it's about me being recognized at the top level for what I have done in this state for the 3 months that I've been in this department. Right, so the fight is there. I feel, you know, the assessments. Anyone who has taught in a class knows that you know your children. You have enough games to play in a class to know कि बच्चे कहाँ पे हैं. You know, but वो assessment जो simple भी है, measurable भी है, 2 हफ्ते में हो भी जाएगा और मैं उसका report भी बना दूँ और फिर मैं बता दूँ, वो assessment हमारे पास नहीं है. You know, so I think the fight there is less ideological. It's more about who wants to do what in how much time. And there I feel, I mean, at least for me, it used to be exciting to create advocates, but sometimes it's very frustrating when they say कि पूरा पढ़ा देना, but 2 ही दिन है training के, ठीक है, और मेरा बुक भी नहीं बदलेगा, ओके, और आपको इतना ही टाइम होगा. एंड रिमेंबर वन थिंग कि टीचर्स को कुछ नया सिखा के जाना. भाई पुराना ही नहीं सीखा, पढ़ाना ही नहीं सीखा, मैं कैसे कुछ नया सिखाऊं? अच्छा, new wine in an old bottle, then I try to do something around it. Now you asked about Bal Vatika. Bal Vatika is what? What is Bal Vatika? 5 to 6 years किस स्टेट में, किस स्कूल में एक क्लास डेडिकेटेड है 5 to 6 years के लिए? है ना? You have enough curriculum documents, and this is again, I just want to share my frustration. People say curriculum आ गया है, बताओ, is this aligned to आधारशिला? Is it aligned to NCF? मैं कोई कंटेंट देती हूँ, वो कहते हैं एज वाइज गोल्स आपने नहीं दिए. मुझे वो क्लास दिखा दो जहाँ एज वाइज एक डेडिकेटेड टीचर के साथ बच्चे बैठते हैं. They tell me कि मुझे गोल्स ये बता. So at the top level, enough documents to debate. At the ground level, a lot has not changed. And so then your question, when you ask me this question, I'm very sad to say कि I still don't have the space to talk about, if you are in 1 year before grade 1, what are those pre-reading skills or numeracy or the whole breadth of skills that children should know, and how should we go about it? I'm not having that discussion. The discussion is कि early years foundational stage है और age wise ये पढ़ा देना, और अगर ये करिकुलम के साथ एनसीएफ या आधारशिला के साथ अलाइन नहीं है, इफ इट्स नॉट अलाइन टू द पॉलिसी डॉक्यूमेंट्स एज वाइज, देन देयर इज अ प्रॉब्लम इन व्हाट यू आर डूइंग. The teacher asks me very different question. The teacher says, I have 3 age groups in my class because there aren't enough teachers. So how do I manage the curricular goals and expectations for the 3 age groups that are sitting in my class? So the conversations are very, like, depending on who you're talking to, one is having a different conversation. Okay, now, and let me also say, since we're talking about Bal Vatika, you're supposed to enter grade 1 at age 6, right? अब एक स्टेट से मेरी उस दिन बात हुई कि ये, because everyone is saying कि एक क्लास, you need to sit in one class before class 1. Class 1 खाली हो गया है because you can't watch the kids, right? In another state they are saying कि सब बच्चों को एक साथ बिठाना है because there's a lot of pressure, so they're fighting with the आंगनवाड़ीज. तुम्हारे बच्चे इधर आ जाए, हमारे बच्चे उधर चले जाए. So they're fighting on this. So I mean, so when we talk about, yes, we do talk about the kind of skills that are required for grade 1, but I don't think people are looking at this age group as a continuum. And look at the reality, which is the children sit together, and what is it the teachers need to do? वो जितने expectations हैं, जितने LOs हैं NCF में, 266 to 286, जितने हैं, सब हमारे textbook में, प्लान में सब आने चाहिए. But what is the sum of that needs to be translated into the class so that children get an opportunity to speak? Is not the conversation that we are having yet. The other, just two, 3 more things I just want to add. One is that around assessments, I think it's very interesting that I find, you know, we go in with our assessments and we go in with these big evaluations, but when we go to the teacher in class, it's business as usual. It's almost like she wears 2 hats. One is जो आपको चाहिए और one is जो मेरे बॉस को चाहिए. ठीक है, जो आपको चाहिए मैं वो एग्रा कर देती हूँ, जो मुझे चाहिए वो FASA के OMR sheets मुझे भरने हैं. Okay, so and this the FASA has nothing to do with what you're supposed to be doing in class, or she probably doesn't look at what is the impact of that FASA on what is the connection between what I'm filling up for a child with what I'm doing in class and how children are progressing. That is a third conversation to be had with teachers. So it's almost like we work in silos and we're trying to bridge the gap in, you know, whatever way we can. And the other thing was around teachers. Shubhra ji, you mentioned that the total amount of time the teachers get to teach is very low, we know that. तो 6 महीने हैं, and उसमें हम कहते हैं विद्या प्रवेश भी है, school readiness module है वो, half your year goes in that, and then you end up measuring something else. For example, बच्चे क्या number solve कर पा रहे हैं या कुछ और कर पा रहे हैं. And I feel like with the teachers who we train also or educate, again educate, that word I was thinking about it, Shailaja ji, ki if I say I'm educating you, then they will say am I not educated? So the terms that we use, I don't know what we should be using, but increasingly I feel the teachers who are curious, it's almost like the way you think about children in a class. The front benchers are those who are, if you think of the teachers in that class, the front benchers are curious and motivated and willing to learn, probably know a little more already by the time you go to train. And then you have the middle level who you're probably influencing, and then there's a last rung which is the ye nahi ho sakta, political union, ye wo kind of thing. So you're teaching a certain percentage. That percentage which is curious is very dedicated, so it's probably involved in many other things outside of instructional time. So how much time do they give to actually teaching in class is a big question. Which brings me to two things, which I mean, I just want to move the needle forward here on when we think about the science of reading. Do we have to think of it as the teacher as the only person who teaches reading? If the teacher is not available, if the teacher is not speaking the language of the children, if the teacher is available but doing other things in class, can we leave the crucial issue of reading only to the teacher? Is a question I want to ask this room, especially for the early years. And the second question I have, again pushing the needle in terms of the future, is that nowadays I find that you can't read, but all of us leave voice notes. When we can't understand a question, we do a Google Bolo, or we speak into the microphone. So what does the science of reading mean without a paper and print in this digital age? How does that change in the next 2 decades is something that I think we need to think about. Is a teacher, I'm just saying these 2 things and I'd love to have a discussion on this after lunch, is a teacher the only person who can teach how to read? If not, can we look at everyone else? And 2, is reading going to be as relevant as it is today in the next 2 decades? Again, a question that we should think about.
Thank you.
First what you asked, and then I'll add one bit more. So what we have seen and what we've been working, with the whole LO framework, learning outcome and competencies, and again I think it goes back to the way we were looking at the science of reading, and when we look at younger children, there's a whole lot about child development theories. And again the similar conflict is visible because there's a lot that is coming from a science of reading into the child development, and fully recognize that the stage is where the children are developing both body and mind, and they require a lot more other stimulation just by doing certain drilling activity, the skilling part of it. So as a, when we look at this whole science of teaching and a child development theorist, there is a conflict even in that space. And when the recent curriculums and the approaches, the instruction material is a quite prescriptive to the extent that we are able to visualize what will happen on a 6th November in a Begusarai in one Anganwadi, because we are providing those kind of a lesson plan for a preschooler. So I think it's also a question to us, what are the principles we are deriving from child development, what are we deriving from a science of reading, and I think morning both Shailaja and they mentioned about the findings and its extrapolation and to the extent that it's generalized. I think that's one part I wanted to bring. And second is, nothing at the ground is significantly changing, at least in a preschool education space, whether we are talking about the teachers, whether we are talking about the learning space. Our own work, which we did it almost 30 years back in Ghaziabad, and it was 5x model, which was about health, nutrition, and this play, and we did see a tremendous result when 3 came together to speak with each other. But again, the worker is reduced to the worker where she has to deliver, while we have talking about the autonomy part of it. Only I think the positive is that now we recognize the importance, but how the science need to translate into the implementation, which still has a long way to go there. And to extent, and I think which I wanted to bring is that when we are talking about the science of reading, and our own work started with adolescent. We started working in a multiple areas long back, and many of the principles which are articulated, we did not know that. We just, as a practitioner and some academician, came together, and in a 1 year time we saw girls were actually not just reading, they were debating, they were questioning, they were criticizing, and these were the adolescent girls about 12 to 13 and 11 to 8, and we did that not in just location to see. It's just that because it's a UP, it's working. We went to Bihar, we went to Odisha. We did even a NU, which is the most difficult geography to work with. And I'd say we worked in multiple, but NU was where it tested our own patience, our ability to engage with the community, going through the religious leader, all of that. But in all location it worked. What we learned is that when we look at the principal part of it and teacher autonomy, and also the agency of the child, that made a lot of significant. And having part of this whole project versus the scale, and we have done the same thing, I think. And our own experience on both on a language and mathematics has been, is some of the principles probably don't work in our context, especially the context of the child. And we do have a two research to establish, and in fact very recently we did in Bihar. We saw that when the children had a extensive exposure to a variety of paint, and when children were supported by home, either by parents or the tutor, and the schools had a practices which are, we call it a good practices, probably not all were good practices. These three were the main contributor, and when we looked at all other factors. So it does seem that not just by how you teach in the classroom, it matters. There's matters who support, and I think it comes from the premise that academic learning time for children over the years is reducing significantly day by day. And we are expecting children to learn a language which is not mine and yours only in a 60-minute, and when we multiply by 180 days, how many hours we have it. So it goes back to how do we increase this learning time, and learning time is, and Gayatri and me keep having a debate about, is it about exposure, is it about the opportunity to engage? And we had a discourse with Subir also, and he mentioned, and we are still sort of thinking about, there is a point where the child has a motivation to engage beyond the classroom. And what is that point? We really don't know, but we saw that in our adolescent program where children were learning even when classrooms were over. They were not asked to go, you read it, they just wanted to read and engage with the text. So what do we do? And these are the things that many of these research really doesn't take into the factor, and when we were also looking at it. So on this space, when we're working with the state, and this is the challenge, because everybody picks up what seems easy and doable. Material looks okay, we change it. XYZ looks okay, we do it. We are expected to do a one-day whole literacy orientation for all the teachers in a one day, and I'm saying the same thing which all of you know. Again, the scale has a problem of somehow scale is also talking about the same thing for everybody. If 35,000 teachers, probably a set of a teacher only need 2 days of engagement, and rest need 10 days of engagement. So I think taking these principles, science into the, converting into the principle, and taking the practice and the work that we did, Shailaja and with Dheer in 2014, then language and literacy. I think that was, I would say, the turning point in many ways for us, and also bringing that into the center. But what makes this particular science works in all public school, we have still a lot, not just we, even government is responsible when they ask all the organizations to come without making a decision who is their best partner. I'm putting myself in the game. I think takes a lot, whether we are accountable to the children or whether it's just ease of operation.
Thank you. We have only about half an hour before lunch. So I would want to come to Sukhna from Rocket Learning, and my last question would be to Amrita, and we would need about 15-20 minutes of just discussion and wrapping up. So, so Sukhna, if you would kindly let us know about your work in the domain of early literacy and early learning. You've used a lot of technology that we know, and what has been your own conceptual premise, and how is that shaping up?
Yeah, thank you. I think the discussions have been very invigorating and really nice perspectives that have been put out. 5 minutes. Yeah, I have my pointers very clearly written, a lot of them probably reinforcing everything that we've spoken about. I think it was there in these presentation, and again I resonate with what Anustup also said, that when you bring context, and probably that's where the discussion and the dynamics of that change, but there are certain prerequisites to learning, and the context and the reality of the children is where which influences the learning environment. If the child is not coming from a safe, stable space and does not find themselves in a very safe, trusted space, the learning never begins. A lot of these dynamics also, not only walking towards stress, etc., but other things, that what does the community and the teachers really believe in? If the parents and the community and the society is largely aspirational about English, and they're introducing that as an aspirational language, but whereas you go in with the whole idea of mother tongue, where do you strike the balance? How do you sort of educate, and how do you bring everybody to consensus on the importance of the mother tongue? And I do have a slight problem using the term mother tongue, because it just seems that, you know, in the families, in the households, the mother tongue might be different from the father tongue. So in the family and in the household itself, you have different languages, and then all of these children coming from very diverse backgrounds and language experiences come to a setup, and we say, okay, let's talk mother tongue, but there is an aspiration to understand English more than anything else, and that is how you judge the quality of early childhood education. And I think I always quote this also, is that they always say that just because my child is coming from a lower socioeconomic strata, you say कि हमारे बच्चों को आप खिला लो और उनको मदर टंग में सिखाओ, पर प्री स्कूल में तो इंग्लिश में सिखाते हैं, उनको ABCD पूरा पता है. So that also meshes itself into what influences a lot of things. I think another thing is, of course, the whole science of it. We've spoken about so many approaches, and a lot of people have also touched on this. At the ground level, for a community frontline worker, it becomes important to know that what do I really have to do? I mean, we're talking about the science, we're talking about brain, we're talking about reading is not natural, oral communication is. One thing is that, of course, the 3 to 6 age group, the foundational stages, there is a lot of focus, and the idea is to focus a lot on oral speaking skills. But what does this mean for an Anganwadi worker? What do I have to do? And the whole idea, when we sort of discussed about Adharshala with a lot of other committee members, etc., was the basic question that an Anganwadi worker asks, that please tell me what do I have to do, because the state curriculum is saying something else. There are another set of NGOs who we are working with. Somebody is giving me TLM, somebody is giving me an entire parallel curriculum, somebody is telling me about a particular approach and what I have to do, and there is this limited time that I have, and I have to respond back to my stakeholders, to my other bosses as well, that this is also what I have to do. So we realized that there was this need for blending science to what implementation really means at a practical perspective, and that was the idea, that can we say that, okay, at the document level, we have spoken a lot about science, and we've thought through what those activities, a spiral of activities, and what can an Anganwadi worker really do in a diverse age skill setup, and what challenges, and trying to obviously blend in with the ideas from the community and frontline workers, that these are your challenges, and can we provide solutions for that. So it was not the idea was to give a very practical guide, which brings in the idea of science and the whole thought and system thinking, etc., but tells the frontline worker that this part has been taken care of and this is probably what you do in a setup like you are, with all these children enmeshed into a context like this. So that was the idea, and I'll also welcome Aziz if you want to add to that.
Probably listen for a bit. Apologies everyone. I just became a father 6 weeks ago and the baby was not doing too well. So I promised Shakti that I'll come after the hospital. So luckily everything is good, but I'll listen for a bit and then I have a couple of points which I'll come to later.
Okay. Can I ask you, Amrita? So, I mean, when you listen to that, this entire spectrum of discussions that are coming to the forefront, we can clearly see that there is a need to consolidate our knowledge. There is a need to get relevant knowledge into the system, whether it's the government or a non-government system, and there is clearly a need to do a lot more of research, do a lot more of understanding as to how we have more knowledge constructed in the context of where we are. So when you look at this larger picture, what is your thought on, like, so there is a need to invest in terms of research, there is a need to invest in terms of actual, because there is an urgency, as Samyukta was also mentioning, and there is also a need to create knowledge. So how do we balance this in your view?
So I think coming after so many different people sharing, I have been kind of thinking of the last probably 20 years and how this whole field has shifted in a way in front of all of us who have also been actors in it. In a lot of way, like Sanyukta said, association itself with when we say literacy, when it evoked only adult literacy, to it being relevant, or when we talk about early literacy being different from adult literacy, starting from there, I think definitely the discourse and the interest and the recognition of the seriousness of the issue and number of different actors, I think we've seen a lot of that shift. But when you say we need consolidation of knowledge, I feel that is still a little far away. We need a lot of, in a way, generation of knowledge and different ways in which knowledge can be generated in meaningful ways. And for that, when I reflect, I think it's really that sort of developing that ecosystem where you have individual actors, where you have organizations and you have institutions, and within that, this whole, historically we have had a great divide between higher education and school education. So like some of our efforts of trying to develop this university school resource network, and within that teacher educators mentoring and working with teachers to do action research, or like Dheer said, there is probably now a lot of implementation, evaluation research, but various other kinds of research is not there. And when I think of why and our own attempts of partially, some of it worked and a lot of it did not work, of trying to seed a certain kind of expertise, say in a university setup through the early literacy, ELI, which was early learning initiative. I think right kind of people with expertise and intent of wanting to sort of bridge the sort of knowledge creation, which has historically in some ways has happened separate from the where actual action is happening. There are people who feel that needs to be bridged, but the right kind of expertise where you have a good understanding of the theory, but you also have your sort of deep, your feet are on the ground where you know how complex the implementation is. I feel that we will need a lot more, even from the trust perspective, and I think it is not so much that if the trust is putting 100 crores in education and 5% of it is in research, can that become 5, can become 10, and then can become 25? But the right kind of people who need to be built, and that is a very long process. It's not one short way to get there. So whether it's some of probably Shailaja's students who are now doing PhDs here or abroad and eventually, you know, wanting to invest back, as well as some very good examples, I would say, from our own organizations who have serious interest in not just doing but reflecting on why, and bringing some of them together. So like, just as an example, when we look at Liril, it had a university collaborator, it had a on the ground collaborator, and then you are creating something together. So I feel a couple of different ways in which we can create knowledge and further the discourse, and it's not just an issue of allocation. That is being the limited point of a slightly long-winded statement.
Would you just add your points?
Very bad time to speak when everyone is about but I think I don't take long, but I do think, you know, we talk about science reading, challenges and opportunities. I do want to bring up one opportunity which I think is there now, which is the possibility of reaching people through digital methods, and how that can impact reading, and how we can marry everything that we've learned over the last 20 years in various contexts using that. So, for example, we always talk about print-rich material being in houses, etc., right? And that is something that's still a struggle. Can you actually use messaging, technology, WhatsApp, other mediums to send audiobooks, send digital storybooks to parents so that they can read those out to their children, right? So basically, those books should be local context, local language, local examples, but they can reach parents and teachers in modern ways. And we have seen one of the biggest delights that parents and teachers have had is when they say that, oh, there are these 5 rhymes or these 10 stories that I have been repeating for donkey's years, and children also sort of have gotten bored now with that, and I have now a new rhyme that I can use with actions and so on, right? So videos can actually help you understand some of those actions. So I think that is powerful. And I think another thing is, we talked about frontline workers, who I mentioned, and them need a little bit more guidance also sometimes in what new things they could do. And some of them are quite good already, and some may need help. And I think Dheer is here, and structured pedagogy has become more and more relevant and known as a concept. How do you provide structured pedagogy while providing flexibility to Anganwadi workers? I think what we've really tried to do also is that, can you use digital to send every day, a set of things that the teacher can do in the classroom, marrying that with whatever is the common plan as well, and give demos of what can be done, etc. Again, we use WhatsApp, but there could be apps, whatever channel is sort of easy for them to understand. We actually have seen supervisors and BEOs doing this with their stakeholders organically, and that's what we've tried to replicate. So I think structured pedagogy can be done in a very offline way by training people of how to do it, and that's a great way of doing it, but it can be kept up and reinforced through daily digital methods as well. So I think just wanted to mention that these opportunities are there to use our expertise and be able to share our expertise on a regular, easy to access basis for parents and for teachers.
Thank you. I think just 2 major takeaways, because I don't want to take much of time here. 2 major takeaways for me from the discussions that I've heard. Number 1 is, I think it is important to keep our lights on in terms of our scientific inquiry of whatever, and into whatever we are doing. Our practice needs to be seen in the light of some sort of conceptual framework learning, and we can clearly see how these contexts that we are talking about, how various complexities that we are talking about, is also actually expanding the horizon of the knowledge. And I think this dialogue between the knowledge and the praxis is extremely important. So this we should be able to invest ourselves. It's not about investing funds, it's also about investing ourselves, our brain spaces into that, our time into that. And number 2, I can clearly see that it is important that we somewhere, fundamentally we are not practitioners. So somewhere our knowledge also needs to come out of our practice, while we can consider all sorts of theoretical programs. And that is where probably we really need to understand how serious knowledge creation can happen from our day-to-day activities. I think that sort of a overview, that sort of a metacognitive view needs to be in place. That's clearly what I can see coming out. And the science of reading, as I say, is once again a wonderful tool. I'm still a great lover of the science, the science of reading. Given the fact that the scope of the science of reading, I've also seen that expanding over the last 2 decades, let's say. And we can clearly see how that is becoming more and more accommodative, and it's coming into a dialogue with answers like I feel. And that is extremely helpful. And this is where, probably, this is just what I want to pick up as one of the major areas or major kinds of inquiry that we really need to do. I mean, do we have a scientific temperament, a scientific inquiry into anything that we are doing? I think this is where we want to, this is my takeaway. And Purnima, if it's just about 2 minutes or 3 minutes to lunch, would you want to just talk about a few steps ahead that we want to take?
Yeah. So I don't want to come in between you and the lunch now. I know it's a crazy time, but I think these were very insightful discussions. And one of the things that while I was making my notes, clearly we all agree that there has been a tremendous shift in terms of the policy when it comes to the education landscape that we're working in. And we also see that how the practices have improved over a period of time. We also acknowledge the participation of government. But there is still a substantial gap between policy and practice. And how do we continue this dialogue? And to really take this discussion forward, I think it's important that we deliberate on the policy to practice gap and what as practitioners and implementers we have to do to ensure that that gap gets, we just need to close that gap. So I would just say thank you for being here, and we will continue this dialogue. As I'm saying that we've got these ideas. We will be sharing a brief note with all of you of all the discussions that we have had today. And as we say, this is, the journey has just begun. These are existential questions that we are actually talking about, asking each other, and this journey will continue. So thank you so much. Thank you.